Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. So can I formally welcome you to our council meeting on this 29th of January 2024. Before we actually go through the business of the agenda, I'm going to ask the monitoring officer, Mrs Sternberg, to once again talk us through the new technology. Mrs Sternberg.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very brief reminder, because I'm sure you don't need reminding how the mics work. Just remember to allow a few seconds for the cameras to focus on you when you press the button and it's your turn to speak. Can I also remind you that you must be in the seat you were allocated as the cameras are tuned into that seat with your names. On the voting, in order to help you, we have put some cards on the table to show you which colour means which vote. And it clearly shows for is green, against is red, and abstain is yellow. So obviously, if you're in doubt, refer to the card. Very good. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mrs Sternberg. So hopefully we're under no illusions now about which way to vote. We'll soon see. So item 1 then, apologies for absence. Mr Marr, first of all, we do have a list of apologies before we go to the leaders of groups. It's easier to say the ones we have.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor S. Fawcett, Councillor M. Foster, Councillor M. Emmons, Councillor C. Renwick, and Councillor P. Ancliffe. Thank you, Chair.
Are there any other apologies? No, thank you. So item 2, declarations of interest. Members are requested to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest and or other interests not already on their register of interests in any items on the agenda and withdraw from the meeting at the appropriate time. There are 4 of us that need to declare an interest for the Ricknold item 7. And that's myself, Councillors Clegg, Gillett and Morley. Are there any other declarations? Councillor Gillett.
I also wish to give a declaration with regards to item 14, which is the paper on the Strategic Leaders Board, in that I am a member of Derbyshire County Council.
Thank you. Councillor Pickering.
Thank you. Is it working now? Thank you, Chair. From our group, there are 4 of us, myself, Councillor Derek Skinner, Councillor Carol Lacey and Councillor Tony Lacey on item 7, who are residents of tenants of Ricknold.
Thank you, Councillor Pickering. Councillor Cupit.
Thank you, Chair. The same interest on item 13, I think it's 13, that Councillor Gillett's just mentioned in relation 14. To DCC. 14, sorry. And then also on item 11A, the motion from Councillor Weatherall, because of my role at DCC, it's not a financial interest or anything like that, but because it may come to me for a decision in future, I'm not going to leave the room, but I'm just going to not vote and not speak on that.
Thank you. Councillor Windley.
Yeah, I need to declare that I'm a resident of Ricknold as well for item 7.
Thank you. Councillor Dale.
The same for item 14 as a member of Derbyshire County Council.
Thank you. Anybody else? Is anyone left to actually debate anything? No other declarations? Right. Thank you. So item 3 then, minutes of the last meeting held on the 27th of November 2023 that have been circulated. Can we have a proposal, please, that we accept those? Thank you, Councillor Barker. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Barry. So rather than going to voting machines, we're going to do this by acclamation. So unless there's any comments about the minutes in terms of accuracy, all those in favour? Anyone against? Any abstentions? Thank you, that's carried. Item 4 then, Chairman's announcements. Those of us involved with supporting North East Derbyshire residents associated with the armed forces will know Diane Jeffrey. She is a former High Sheriff who chaired the Derbyshire Armed Forces Covenant meetings and was Honorary Colonel of the Derbyshire Army Cadet Forces. Diane was made a Dame in the New Year's Honours list. Also included in the list is Millie Bright, born in Chesterfield and brought up in Killamarsh. The Chelsea player, no cheers for Chelsea then. The Chelsea player won the European Championships in 2022 with England and captained the team to the final of the recent World Cup. Millie has been made an OBE. On behalf of North East Derbyshire District Council, I congratulate both recipients on honours that recognise their positive contributions to others. Put in brackets, muted applause then. Well, Jean and I feel privileged to have finally made it to a publication featuring heavy metal. Yes, Ringing World, the Bell Ringers Weekly Global Magazine.
There's a joke there somewhere.
This followed our attendance at a service at Old Brampton Church to mark the centenary of the villagers' church bells. Proceedings were led by the Bishop of Repton, and we were invited to join campanologists in the bell tower. It was a wonderful experience. You too can share the same when you will be invited to participate in bell ringing to raise funds for our charity appeal. Look out for details in due course. We also attended the annual dinner of the Chesterfield and North East Derbyshire Deaf Society. While members welcome national news of the launch of a British Sign Language GCSE from September 2025, the Society is facing several local challenges. I encourage this council to continue its own positive work in supporting deaf people in North East Derbyshire. In turn, it would be good to see other authorities understanding the need to assist the communication requirements of deaf people in this county. Thank you to councillors who joined us for the Burns Night last week. It was a splendid occasion. Please continue to check your emails and council social media for forthcoming events. As well as having a good time, you'll also be making a difference for Ashgate Hospice, which serves cancer patients and their families across North Derbyshire. Thank you. Item 5, Leader of the Council's announcements. Over to Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. Just on your announcements, Martin, I'd say that we definitely can support the deaf charities and stuff. I think that's really important. And obviously congratulate Diane Jeffrey and Millie Bright as well. Thank you for that. I know it's a bit late, but I would like to take this opportunity at our first meeting of this year to wish everyone a happy and safe and prosperous 2024. From a council perspective, 2024 looks like being an exciting and challenging year. None more so when it comes to money and the council finances, as we will discuss later when we come to the budget debate. Our finances are in a better shape than many of our neighbours, but that doesn't mean 2024 will be a plain sailing or that we won't face some hard choices. It's easy for what appears to be a stable financial position to suddenly get out of hand if you take the eye off the ball, into italics, and Charlotte. You know what I mean? Whatever the cause of the financial problems at the county and at other authorities, we all know that 14 years of Tory austerity and the permanent underfunding of local government has been a feature of those years, which is just one reason why a general election can't come soon enough, so that the country can have a new government and a fresh start. We should be aware of the possible knock-on effects of the county council budget cuts and what they might have on districts and boroughs as we face having to pick up some of the fallout. And more importantly, we should never forget that people affected by these latest round of county council cuts, many of whom are the most vulnerable in society, include many of our residents. Another major challenge facing the council are the proposed changes to the waste collection service, including the possible requirement to collect food waste on a weekly basis. But on a positive note, I can report that we are developing proposals for a new depot to replace the one at Eckington. I think we can all agree the depot is past its best and is prone to flooding on a regular basis. As part of that initiative, we are considering establishing a cross-party group to help shape this project. Something on this scale that is so fundamental to the council services and shouldn't be politically contentious. I would like to thank the opposition group for the way they participate in the senior management review that we undertook before Christmas, and I'm also pleased to announce that work continues on our pledge to build or acquire more social houses and to continue modernising and insulating our existing homes. We are progressing the scheme at Stonebroom, and the houses at Wingfield are going up fast. In fact, they put roof on one this week, with the prospect of the keys to one of the houses being handed over before the summer. Such an ambitious programme isn't without its own challenges, but the council's relationship with Ricknold Homes has never been better, and I am confident we can deliver. Ricknold Homes also face the task of complying with new regulatory regime, something they must do with little money. Whilst I will leave Lorraine Shaw to go into that in more detail later at the meeting, I can't overemphasise the need for us all to be aware that all housing providers face increased scrutiny as they comply with these regulations and the impact this will have on service delivery. So I hope you will take that into account when we come to the debate and vote on the item later. I want to conclude by mentioning the results of this year's employee survey. I know Lee were pleased with that. The response rate is 61%. It is the best we've ever had. Whilst this does flag up some issues that will need addressing, overall the responses were very positive, with 75% saying that they feel part of a team and that they belong at North East Derbyshire. Also, 94% of them understand how their work contributes to the council's success. So I'm proud of our staff, of the work they do for our residents and of their passion and commitment to North East Derbyshire. So I'd like to pass on all my thanks to all those that took part in the survey and thank everyone for their contribution to the work of the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. So item 6, public participation. Well, I can confirm there are no public questions. So moving straight to item 7, which is the medium-term financial plan. Just to remind members and those that are still relatively new to council that we actually take this in 2 parts. So the first will be the general fund, and then we'll move to the housing revenue account so that those who've declared an interest can leave at that point. So I'm going to call on the Director of Finance and Resources, Jane Dethick, to give us the presentation on the general fund, please.
Just wait for the technology to catch up. There we go. That's it. Okay, thank you again, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Kerry is going to present the MTFP to you in a short while, but just before we do that, I just wanted to take a little bit of time to just run through some of the more technical aspects of the financial plan for the next 4 years. And Lorraine Shaw from Ricknold Homes has very kindly come along to join us, and is going to talk specifically about the impact of the regulation on our housing revenue account. So. Oh, can't you hear me? Is that better? That better? I'll stand near the microphone. Yeah, that's better. It is on. It is on. Oh, I can hear myself better now. So, right, okay. So, today we're going to have a quick look at the general fund. We're going to move on to the HRA, the housing revenue account, and we're going to look at the capital programmes for both of the above accounts. We're going to look at the current budget, which is the revisions of the budget that was approved last January. And we're going to look at the original budget, which is the legal budget that you're going to consider today. And that's all produced in the context of a financial plan, which is for the following 3 years. The following 3 years isn't a legal requirement, but it's absolutely prudent to produce a budget in that context. So that's what we're doing today. I will apologise up front. This presentation's largely the same as the one that went to scrutiny a couple of weeks ago. So if you did see it to scrutiny, you're going to see it again today. So apologies for that. So just a little bit of a look at the economic, fiscal and regulatory outlook, because this all impacts on the decisions that we take when we're setting the budget. Our inflation policy mirrors the Bank of England's monetary policy, and that's targeted to hit 2% during 2025. Interest rates also mirror the Bank of England's monetary policy, and they're expected to fall slowly over the next couple of years to 3% by the middle of 2026. There are some changes to the social housing regulation, which we'll hear from Lorraine on in a little while. And there's also the introduction of the Office for Local Government, which is a department of local government within the DLOC, within Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, which is why we call it DLOC, which is going to concentrate on performance monitoring across the piece for local government. In terms of financial impact, pay settlements in for next year's budget, 3% and then 2% thereafter. That's mirroring the inflationary policy. And that's a welcome relief because we had 9% in 22-23 and 6.5% in 23-24, which of course have been built into the base. Contractual spend increases again of mapping inflation, mirroring inflation largely. And then we've got the cost of regulation, which Lorraine will come on to shortly. So in terms of the national settlement, it's second year of a 2-year settlement, but it's actually a rollover from 2019. There's been very, very little change to the basic principles of the settlement since 2019. What it does give is some certainty for the first 2 years of the plan, and as you can see there, the level of government grant funding that we're getting from, well, you can't quite see it, can you, because it's blocked off by my face, which is a bit annoying, but I can tell you that that box there where it says, oh, thank you, it's 389, thank you for that. So you can see we had 970 last year, and it's 990 forecast for 24-25. And then last week we had an announcement from the Secretary of State that following the consultation of the draft national settlement, some further funding is being made available to local authorities. It's mainly for social care authorities. There are some additional grants for rural communities, but all councils are receiving a 1% increase to the funding guarantee. So on the previous slide where you saw the 3% funding guarantee, that's been increased to 4% for all local authorities. I've only got estimated figures at the moment. They're the ones that we've calculated. We think that's going to be about £92,000 additional income for us. So that takes the 389 plus 92. The value won't be confirmed until after the final settlement's approved and been through Parliament in February. I've stood here for the past 4 years and talked about funding reforms, and once again I'm going to talk about funding reforms again today. So we're not expecting them to be before the general election now. So the earliest impact for our budget is likely to be 26-27. The government are committed to the reforms. They've also committed to transitional protection this year, which is a welcome addition to the discussions around the reforms. But what that does do is put a considerable amount of uncertainty into the later years of the financial plan. The business rates reset, which you've all heard me talk about on lots of occasions in the past, is still being linked to the funding reforms, and we're still expecting that to proceed. And we're expecting all of those to take effect from 26-27. That's what I've built into the MTFP. So in terms of the current budget, the budget that you approved last January, we've revised that position. The shortfall at the time of approval was 784. That shortfall is now reduced to 331, and we'll continue to work through those efficiencies as the remaining months of the year progress. The pay award was built into that. We've just talked about that. That was a rather hefty 11%, sorry. And one of the other pressures that we're seeing is homelessness. So increased costs, it's a national trend, but we're seeing increased costs that are really impacting on our budgets in terms of temporary accommodation need, bed and breakfast, etc. So to put that into context, we've had an annual budget of £18,000 for bed and breakfast. That's now 150. Utilities, thankfully, have started to subside a little bit from the highs of 22-23, so that's scooped up some of those pressures for us. So in terms of the 24-25 budget, we've got a £302,000 shortfall before any decisions that you will take today with regards to council tax. If you were to follow the recommendation in the report, which is for 2.99%, that would reduce that shortfall to 100,000. If you then take the 92,000 off that we're expecting to come from government for the additional funding guarantee, we're around about £8,000 short for 24-25. We have cash limited the budgets wherever possible, and all the cost pressures from prior years have been included in the base, and that's predominantly pay, but also includes contracts. And as I said on the previous slide, we've got pay inflation of 3% and the government grants of just short of £1 million. In terms of the forecasts for 25-26 through to 27-28, the main impact is the funding reforms from April 2026. So in all of these forecasts, I've removed the government grants. I've included the impact of the business rates reset, which is a loss of income from the growth on business rates, and I've included the transitional protection forecasts. So just a note on council tax and the decision that you'll be taking today. The government set the cap for council tax, that's currently set at 3%. There is an increase in dependence on council tax income in our council budgets. And just to give you an idea, 40% of our general fund income comes from the council tax. The key thing here, though, is any decision that you take today affects every year thereon in. We're increasing the base. So just like a pay increase increases the base in terms of costs, a council tax increase increases the base in terms of income. And that's the slide that's actually in the report that shows the budget position in numeric terms, and that kind of emphasises the importance, that middle line emphasises the importance of keep growing that base in terms of council tax, because you can see that impact that has on that bottom box, bottom right, after the 4 years of the plan. So moving on to the housing revenue account, it's a ring-fenced account and it's self-financed from the rents. So the general assumptions within the HRA are largely as the general fund, and Ricknold Homes experience all similar pressures to us. That, you know, their pay costs have gone up by similar amounts to all of ours. There's increasing pressure on the sector through the changes in regulation, and as a council we have an ambition to build, acquire and facilitate provision of more affordable homes across the district where resources allow. So just having a quick look at the rents, they are the main source of income to the HRA, and the regulator, the social housing regulator, directs the landlords on the maximum increase every year. So that's based on a CPI +1, and that's calculated at the 30th of September. So for 24-25, the maximum rent increase that we can set as a council is 7.7%. Just like the general fund, we're legally required to have a balanced budget each year. And when we pulled the HRA together this time, we needed 5% to break even. So to just ensure that we could meet that legal requirement, we needed to increase the rents by 5%. The recommendation in the report is 6%, and that's largely to provide some financial resilience for the cost of regulation, which is a similar decision to which you took as a council last year. And now I'm going to hand over to Lorraine to talk to you a little bit about social housing regulation.
Good afternoon, everybody. Just before I talk about social housing regulation, I'm just going to put into context where we are as in social housing. I keep saying this, and I say it every meeting I'm at the moment, there's never been a more challenging time for social housing. And in my experience, there's been some challenging times. This is the worst I've ever seen it. Lots of things are coming our way all at once. It's like a perfect storm. But the regulation is the key thing that is going to affect us in the next 4 or 5 years. The council's ambition to build and acquire new affordable social housing for rent is a really ambitious target of 400 in the next 4 years. It's doable, it's absolutely doable. It relies on, though, our being able to meet all the regulators' requirements of us. So I'll just take you through a little bit what the Social Housing Regulation Act means for social housing here in North East Derbyshire. So one of the key things as a result of this is all social housing will be inspected by the Social Housing Regulator in the next 4 years. That could come this year, it might not come for another 4 years, but we have to be ready for it. I think it's really important to say that that inspection isn't just going to be about Ricknold Homes. This is definitely going to be about this council and its governance arrangements with Ricknold Homes and our performance that you monitor on a regular basis. And I'm pleased to say that the regulation, the governance arrangements between ourselves are really strong. The partnership arrangements between the council and Ricknold Homes have never been stronger. The strategic housing partnership meetings that we have regularly will demonstrate to the regulator how well this partnership's working. So that's really important, and I think it's really key to know that the council is going to be inspected, not just Ricknold Homes. So the regulator has introduced 4 revised consumer standards, and I'll go into those in a little while on a different slide. But it's really important that we understand that The purpose of those standards is to give our tenants a voice, to have more involvement with our tenants, for them to determine what they want from their landlord. And that's very clear when you look at the standards. The new standards for Decent Homes 2 is just around the corner. We're already consulting on that. I don't know if any of you in the room remember Decent Homes back in the day, but this is a much more onerous Decent Home standard. It requires us to know our housing stock. It needs us to know everything about our housing stock so that we can have programs in place to make sure that it's fit for purpose, that its health and safety requirements are met. You'll see there that we mention HHSRS. That is the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, and we have to apply that to everything we do in housing. There's also a requirement for us to have an EPC of C by 2030. That's quite a big ask for this type of housing stock, but we are working on that. And component life cycles, and that's very much linked to the next point, which is stock condition surveying. Now, we've done stock condition surveying right since Ricknold Homes was set up back in the day, 2007. We've always done it on a 5-year rolling process. We now have to do it every 2 years. We have to know every single property's condition within the housing stock. Again, that's a big ask, and it's something we're working really hard on at the moment. We have, excuse me, we have a team of surveyors that are doing this work, and that work is now feeding our capital programmes, which Shane and I will talk about in a little while. Some of the issues that are coming alongside the regulation is disrepair, and we have, again, back to stock condition, we need to know the condition of our housing stock. When we don't, we're in danger of getting a disrepair claim. Now, that is a process that is very well documented, but it is causing us lots of issues, and it's all to do with the legal process that lawyers are chasing this, helping our tenants to put in disrepair claims. Damp and mould. You'll all be aware of the tragic event in Rochdale, which has led to our AWAB's law. We've been having a session this morning because there is a consultation out, because this is going to be law. The consultation process is underway, and we are responding to that with our comments and our feedback. What that will do is mean that we have to respond to damp and mould issues much more quickly than we have in the past. And I'll be the first to admit that social housing hasn't always dealt with damp and mould in the way it should have. However, there has to be a balance, because this cannot just be about social housing landlord. This has to be about the tenant's responsibility for their property too. So there is a balance there, but we have to get that right. It's incredibly important. We wouldn't want to see any further tragedy like we saw in Rochdale. Other changes coming out of the regulation is electrical legislation is changing, and that will be a much more speedier timescale for us to do electrical remedial works. And again, I don't know if you're aware, but we do an electrical testing programme. We test, again, this is on a rolling programme, and this has to be brought forward because we need to do it quicker. And it is going to become a statutory requirement. It isn't at the moment. Gas is, but electrical isn't. Gas safety is paramount to us, and we are 100% compliant with the statutory requirements for gas. Tenant satisfaction measures have been introduced, and we have been working with them as a trial for the last year and a half, so we're very well used to undertaking tenant surveys. You'll be pleased to know that we sent out our annual tenant survey last week. It's been out there for 9 days. We've already had 940, I checked before I came, 940 responses, and the satisfaction level is 87.9%. We are so pleased with that, I can't tell you, because the average in the industry is at around 65%, so we're way above average. The regulator is also going to publish league tables, so that's going to be a case of reporting our performance against others. That always comes with a problem, because you never know whether you're comparing apples and oranges or apples and pears, but we do need to do that, and we are going to have to do that as part of the regulation. All of these things that I'm talking about come at a cost. They can't be done easily. We need additional staff for things like damp and mould surveying, cleans of moulds, etc. Electrical legislation, bringing it quicker. We need to do more testing. It all comes with a price. The biggest one, though, is that all of your senior executive and senior housing staff have to be qualified in CIH, Chartered Institute of Housing, over the next 5 years. That is huge. That's absolutely huge. It's usual to have a balanced team and have one or two that are in a part of CIH. This requires us to have every single housing executive qualified as a Chartered Institute of Housing member. That also comes at quite a cost. Alongside the regulator, we now have a housing ombudsman who've got more power. They've got more power to publish best practice guidance, and we're seeing more of that. We've had 2 ombudsman inquiries this last 4 months, and in the past we've had none. So we are seeing an increase in housing ombudsman inquiries, which is a good thing, I have to say. It does mean we have to really understand what we're doing for our tenants and that we are using best practice. Just to put into context, though, housing ombudsman complaints and our complaints, Ricknold Homes does 80,000 contacts with our customers in a year through the contact centre. We undertake 32,000 responsive repairs a year on average, and we have 49 formal complaints last year. So put that into context, I think we're doing okay. However, that we can't become complacent. We have to be able to meet all of this regulation in order for us to do what this council wants us to do and build new properties. Just mention adaptations. The changes may have come about as a result of a recent High Court judgment. So we have an adaptations policy which ensures we do our adaptations, but we do them in the properties that most suit people's needs. That's had to change. So we are looking at a change to this and possibly being able to access Disabled Facilities Grant, which at the moment is not available to social housing, but Jane and I are going to have a discussion about that to see if we can make that change. Otherwise, we are going to have some issues coming out of that policy and we're going to have to make some changes to that. So the consumer standards, as I said, they're all very much focused on what's right for the tenant, what the tenant wants from us as a landlord, and what we are doing to keep our tenants safe and healthy. So the safety and quality standard, it does what it says on the tin. We have to ensure that all our homes are good quality and that they're safe for our tenants. The transparency, influence and accountability standard should always have been in place, and it's absolutely what we should be doing, and it's always been a key part of our business plan. So that's not new for us. The neighbourhood and community standard requires landlords to engage with other parties so that our tenants can live in safe and well-maintained neighbourhoods and feel safe in their homes. And that really does mean we have to engage with other agencies, social care, mental health teams, the police. We have lots of joint meetings with those agencies to make sure that our tenants have those safe and well-maintained neighbourhoods. The tenancy standard sets out the requirements for fair allocations and lettings, which we absolutely do, and it is your allocations policy that we adhere to and we use, and how those tenancies are managed and ended by the landlord. So again, we need to be really careful that we're doing all the right things for our tenants. So I think in summary, we have to get the regulation right, we have to be able to demonstrate it, we have to be able to evidence it, and that's going to be absolutely key to enable us to do the really nice stuff, which is the new build and the acquisitions and the buybacks, etc. Jane? I'm staying.
Don't fall over that wire.
There you go.
So just very, very briefly, just to run through the general fund projects. So you'll all be aware of the work that's going on at Claycross Active to replace the Charlotte Park Leisure Centre and the Claycross Town Centre. We've also got a vehicle replacement scheme in place. We've also got the UK Shared Prosperity scheme that's ongoing at the moment. In terms of the HRA, we're going to be investing another £46 million into capital works in our existing housing stock, and we've got a £10 million programme over the next 4 years to acquire additional units as well. Lorraine's going to now talk you through some of the schemes that Ricknold are working with on our behalf.
I think most of you are aware of these schemes that are currently ongoing. Whiteley's Nigel referred to earlier. We are due to have 70 new homes on that estate, and our first completion is due this year in May. So we should be handing keys over early this year. Stonebroom bungalows will give us 77 for rent, all of them being for rent. The one thing that we haven't made clear in here, and I will mention, is we have an application into Homes England for Ricknell Homes to become a developer partner, and that will allow us to access grant, which will mean that we can do more mixed tenure schemes. We can do a mix of HRA along with RP, give us more financing opportunities, and it'll give us quite some considerable grant should that application be accepted. And we have had some really positive feedback from Homes England, so that's really good. The other things we're working on, the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, you'll all be aware of it, is the external wall insulation work that we've been doing. But alongside that, we've been putting in extra measures. So we're putting in roofs, we're doing windows and doors, lots of things that give it a whole house approach. And we've also received devolution funding, and we've been doing 7 whole house retrofits. That was a small pocket of money, but it's there, and it's something that's made it really possible for us to do some additionality. So 7 whole house retrofit properties due June this year. We've got other schemes in the pipeline, not that I intend to go into today, but there are certainly things that we're in discussion with some of you about, and we will be looking to meet that target of 400 HOP homes in the next 4 years. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorraine. Last slide, you'll all be pleased to know. So this is the one that keeps me up at night. So Section 25 of the Local Government Act 2003 requires that local authority, when you're considering your budget and setting your council tax, has to report on the adequacy of the financial reserves in relation to budget setting. I'm pleased to be able to report that today I'm satisfied that the levels of reserves that the council has at this time are adequate to fund the budget, they're adequate to fund the planned expenditure, they're adequate to fund the capital programme and any potential risks and issues that would identify. I've listed all of the reserves that we have generally available, unring-fenced there, but they are all detailed in the report if you do want to go through them in some more detail. And I believe, Chair, that's where we end. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Ethick, and thank you, Mrs Shaw. So that provides a context for the paper that we're considering this afternoon. So I'm going to hand over now to Councillor Kerry to speak and then move the recommendations in the general fund section, which are to do with recommendations 1 to 8. Councillor Kerry.
Thank you, Chair. Today I'm presenting the medium-term financial plan for the current year's budget along with the original budget for 24-25 and the planning budgets for the following 3 years, 27 to 28. I will first be presenting the general fund budget for members' consideration and approval. There are no major changes to the current budget. We are still on track to identify the remaining savings of 331,000. Progress will be reported to the Cabinet and scrutiny in the Q3 monitoring next month. The draft financial settlement was released on the 18th of December. Table 1 in Appendix 1 shows the grants awarded, and we're now expecting a small windfall following the announcement last week. Let me reiterate that this is a one-off funding and there is no commitment that this will continue into future years. When the actual amounts are confirmed in the final settlement that will be laid before Parliament in February, we will adjust the budget accordingly. The funding reforms have once again been delayed and will now not be considered until after the general election. It is widely expected that there will be no changes in the 25-26 funding methods because of this. Table 2 in Appendix 1 shows the forecast position for the next 4 years, 24-25. The gap before council tax increase is 302,000. This reduces to 100,000 should the recommended council tax increase be approved today, and will reduce to 8,000 if the government's additional funding is in line with our estimates. The resilience reserve will be utilised to fund this small shortfall, and I am confident that this saving will be comfortably achieved during the year. A council tax increase of 2.99 is recommended for 24-25. It's never easy making decisions about the increase, and a balance must be sought between our financial position and the impact to our residents. Table 2 demonstrates how important council tax income is, and it is also important to note that the annual increase not only services the current year's budget, but also increases the base for the future years. The main points to note in the general fund account programme are that most of the town deal projects will be completed in 24-25, after which the general fund capital programme reduces considerably. Finally, the 151 officer has provided a view on the adequacy of the reserves in the medium-term financial plan and raised no concerns. Our resilience reserve will continue to provide protection against budget gaps, and the investor save reserve remains at a healthy level, and the general fund balance remains intact. We recognise that we are in better financial position than many local authorities, some of whom are struggling to set balanced budgets next year, but nonetheless we do appreciate that there is still a need to continue to tackle the underlying budget deficit in a planned and managed manner. This council has an excellent track record of both identifying and delivering service efficiencies as required, alongside a strong commitment to the financial resilience and the good financial governance. I'll hand back to the Chair for questions and comments.
Well, are you moving the recommendations at 1
I
to
will
8?
move the recommendations. I'd move the recommendations in 1 and 2, then recommendations 3 to 7 in respect of the general fund.
Thank you. I'll second that.
Thank you. Can we just clarify, we've had a newspaper circulated, haven't we? I'm just saying that we've had an updated paper circulated which had 1 to 8, Councillor Kerry, so I'm just wondering, are you moving 1 to 8?
Yes, Chair.
No, thank you. Right, any comments or questions? Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Chair. It's no surprise to me that Councillor Barker wants to detract from the matter before us today by focusing on Derbyshire County Council. But I think the reality from my perspective, as evidenced by the budget that's before us today, is that actually you've inherited a very healthy budget from the last administration. I think Councillor Kerry even said it for himself that we have an excellent record of achieving efficiencies. And I think you need to look no further than the reserves position. You have a £2.6 million in a resilience reserve, which we specifically established to help soft land the council through the challenging times that we all knew were to come post-COVID, as we're seeing now. That's in addition to £2 million in the general fund reserve and almost £2 million in the investor save reserve. The budget that we inherited in 2019 had only £4 million worth of reserves. And I think that's thanks to the prudent management of the budget that we're in a better position now to take on those challenges that we're facing. And it's almost a year to the day since we set the current budget. At the time, Councillor Kenyon was very clear that we had allocated a worst-case scenario amount from the resilience reserve, and we would continue to deliver efficiencies over the course of the year to make that allocation necessary. And that's exactly what's happened. If you look at what's happened to the current year's budget, we've gone from allocating a total of 784,000. We're only actually projected to need 331,000. And in conversation with Jane the other day, it sounds like that will decrease even further throughout the course of this year. So the reality is, you know, you inherit a very good budget. There was a significant use of reserves, but no one was ever intending for that to be that full amount. We were always going to deliver efficiencies, as you're seeking to do with this year's budget, the coming year's budget, and future years. As I say, you inherited a very plentiful reserves, a good, strong, healthy budget. And what else would a resilience reserve be for if it wasn't for soft landing some of the impact of some of the challenges that we're facing and enabling our residents to not see huge cuts to services or or some of our staff to have significant redundancies. It's about delivering a calm and measured approach to getting us to the next stage. But what I think most frustrating is the rank hypocrisy of Labour's approach. They did their level best to trash our budget last year. Even in May, upon becoming leader, Nigel again criticised the use of council tax to the maximum amount and the use of reserves in the current year's budget. They campaigned on it vigorously during the election. But I'm really struggling to find any difference in approach here from Labour. As Councillor Kerry said himself, there are no major changes in this budget. And actually, it's pretty much identical to the future year's projection that we adopted last year. There is literally no change. And I'm struggling really to understand how Labour have had a year in office now to get to grips with this budget. And there are no bright ideas for any massive efficiencies that they promised to reduce that need to rely on reserves or reduce the council tax burden. There's just absolutely nowhere, because I don't think fundamentally you have any bright ideas. And I think, unfortunately, it's starting to dawn on the Labour group that with power comes responsibility, and setting a budget is never an easy task. But a word of advice from me, if you're going to slam your opposition's approach, it's probably sensible to at least try to do something different when you come into power. And finally, I do think the government's announcement last week of additional funding somewhat changes things for the council. Given we are in a much healthier position, and all that's said before, I think it's right to show residents that we are on their side at this difficult time. The additional monies from government means that we could quite comfortably drop council tax by a further 1%. And clearly, obviously, this has an impact on future years' budgets. I fully understand and accept the arguments around that going into the base and future years not being quite as good. But we do have to put council tax, 1% of council tax into context. It's worth about £70,000 to the council. It's not a huge amount in comparison to the efficiencies that we have a very strong track record of making, as Councillor Kerry has claimed.
You're running out of time, Councillor Dale.
Okay, thank you. Clearly this has an impact on future years' budgets, as I say. I don't think anyone thinks that the projections in the budget are going to be as bad as they are, because any government, whatever colour, is not going to drop off support in the way that has been proposed. And obviously Jane has to do that as an accountant to demonstrate worst case scenario. But no, that's never really going to happen. Inflation's continuing to fall. We are in a good position, so I'd like to therefore propose an amendment to reduce council tax request to 1.99%. Thank you, Chair.
Right, so that's been proposed. It's 1.99%. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Cupid, are you wishing to speak now? Right. So we're going to now debate the 1.99% part of it that's been amended. So any comments about the 1.99% amendment? Councillor Barker.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously, we've arrived at this position with that recommendation. We've looked at all as budgets and as forecasts. I think at this stage, if you're going to propose that, which you have, the 1%, it's got to be costed somewhere, Alex. It's got to be done in a proper costed way, and the effects of that. Obviously, we're not going for that. We've proposed and seconded the 2.99%. I accept what you're saying. The budget was in a strong state, and thank you for that. And I think the management of that through Jane and her staff has been really good. I fully get that, but that little bit of a carrot that they chucked out last week don't really make a lot of difference to district councils. It's mostly for the social services councils that have got all that on, which is desperately needed. I fully get that, but we're definitely committed to. It's always a challenge, as you've said. Setting a budget is not easy because people have to pay for it, and there will be a knock-on to this. I'd like to think how much other authorities, the county, and the police and the fire are putting their budgets up. So it is a cumulative thing, but we as a district council need that 2.9% this year, because it rolls on for future years. It'll have an impact forever, basically. So we need that 2.99%.
Thank you. Councillor Hancock.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. I sit here, obviously, as a council taxpayer and agree with every word that Councillor Dale's just said, but I think sitting here and looking at this realistically, an additional 1% cut just is not going to make the figures work. We have got a good track record of finding savings, The problem is, ultimately, you're going to get to the point where there are no more savings to find until you are scrapping services and making redundancies. Yes, that extra 92,000 that we've had from the government, it's nice, but we also know that suddenly things come along and all of a sudden we've got a huge bill that we weren't expecting anyway. So I think in principle I would like to support it, but pragmatically I just don't think we can support the amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Gillett.
Chair, I must admit, I came here today not expecting to say anything because I didn't think the Tory group would say much about council budgets given the debate that I think is going to take place in 2 or 3 weeks' time, when unless things have changed dramatically, we're looking at, I think, a £73 a year increase in Band D property on top of the £13 a year increase in Band D property that the Police and Crime Commissioner asked for last year. Now, anybody who knows anything about local government finance knows that a lot of the restraints on a council like this, or indeed on any council, is the government finance and the grant we get, and therefore the opportunity to change things sometimes takes time. And the difference between a 2.99% and a 1.99%, 1% difference, I think works out at 4p a week to the council taxpayer. That's what we're arguing about today, which to any individual, if you're really, really struggling, 4p is a big difference. If you've got no money, you've got no money. But for a lot of people, I think they'll say, you know, it doesn't make a difference to them, whereas it can make a difference to this council. So I don't understand the logic of the argument that's been put forward. If we're making a substantial change to the council tax, yes, I could get that. But to propose a change that amounts to £2 a year, if I understand the figures right, which is about 4p a week, it doesn't seem a big saving. And but it equally can have an important influence on this council, because we all know that if you regularly don't put the council tax up, and the government doesn't put the grant up as well, that is the road to ruin for local authorities in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Gillett. Councillor Adlington Stringer, please.
Thank you, Chair. I admire Councillor Dale's praise of the Conservative administration for protecting this council through an age of government austerity, economic chaos, which has come from the top down. So well done I'm pleased we had a resilience fund to protect ourselves from you. Congrats. Putting tax up is never favourable. The public are never going to like it, but unfortunately we have to do this. And looking at this budget, I must say I agree with Councillor Gillett's comments. I didn't think that you would have much of a problem with this. It seems quite modest in much of a way. So just as your government is trying to hold on now, you're using this populist idea to try and cut by 1% the tax rises just for a headline approach, and that really just sums up the attitude that you're taking at the moment, and I find that quite appalling. So I will be supporting the Labour Group's budget today. No. So, yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Councillor Shipman.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with my colleague, Councillor Hancock, and actually what's been said by other people so far. But the problem I have, and I've been saying this for a good couple of years now, is that we're being told to look at a budget and vote on it, and there's no cost-saving measures that are actually put forward for councillors to review. Now, I don't think that's giving councillors, you know, all the information to make an informed decision on what ultimately is we're asking residents to pay more or less, as the Conservative amendment is. And actually, if you look at these figures, it's very difficult not to vote for the increased council tax, but it's also difficult to vote for it and against it. And I would like proposals coming forward. We're nearly 12 months on now since the Labour administration has took over, and we've still not had this detailed plan that I think we were all promised last year about what's going to be done and how money is going to be saved and where is it coming from and where are the savings. We are giving, you know, we're asking to approve the budget here. It's still got pie in the sky estimations on what Charlotte Park's going to do. I raised this in service of scrutiny, and I still have no additional information in terms of what the business analysis behind it was, what the business case was. I'd like to see that just to find out what their kind of logic on it all was. You'll see Kilmarsh Leisure Centre, which again I've been banging on about for years. This was the amount we were going to spend on Kilmarsh was supposed to reduce year on year since we took it on. It's now flying up to the tune of, from this year, over 125,000. We were not promised that when we were given the business case on Kilmarsh. So why on earth should we trust the business case for Charlie Park when that has kind of gone to be a mess, to be fair, in Kilmarsh? Because what we was promised and told and asked to vote on, again, was completely wrong. Well, so yeah, I won't be voting for the amendment purely because I don't feel informed enough to be able to vote a reduction in council tax from what's being proposed. But I can't support the budget either. So I'm in a difficult position as a councillor on this council. So that's my position. I won't be voting for this amendment. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. Being new to these budget arrangements as a new councillor, I don't feel fully informed. I'll echo some of Councillor Shipman's comments. For example, dwelling rents. I did ask this in the scrutiny committee. Appears to flatline after this financial year, and yet we bake in council tax rises. Why don't we bake?
I think you've gone on to an HRA matter. We're not discussing that. We're discussing general fund.
Right. I apologise if that's the case. In other words, then, in my opinion, there are a few things in the HRA matter that affect the overall financial position of the council, and it isn't as pessimistic as I believe is made out. We don't have enough information. So to say that we can't afford to reduce council tax a little, I think, is incorrect.
Any other comments? If not, I'll return to Councillor Dale for right of reply.
Councillor Cupid, is she reserved?
No, she said no. Thank you. Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with quite a lot of what Councillor Shipman said. Actually, I think the way that we budget in this council does leave quite a lot of information, out of it. At county, as is well known, we have a long list of savings proposals to achieve a balanced budget. Whereas at this council, I think we offset that by striking out from reserves and trying to achieve efficiencies along the way, which we have a good track record of doing. But members don't get that information, so I think there's a fair point around that, and I think it's take it as constructive criticism that could be better looked at in future. In terms of the council tax reduction, I think we're in a position where, as I say, we've got £6.6 million sat in reserves, and we're still asking for the full council tax amount. We know that we're going to get a balanced budget this year because the shortfall is as low as 100,000. That'll be wiped out by the extra 92. So we're going to get a balanced budget, if not better. We're probably going to end up with a surplus at the end of this year. And therefore, I think it's right. It's right to only ask residents to pay what we actually need. And I think I do accept the position about the future year's base, and we will face difficult times to come, I'm sure. But I don't think they'll be as bad as what's projected in the budget, because it is worst case scenario planning. So I do think we can afford that. The government announcement does change change things quite significantly, and I think it might only be a few pennies, as Councillor Gillett said, maybe enough to buy a tea cake and a bun or whatever Councillor Kerry said a few years ago. But I think that's an important statement to our residents, that we're not asking them to pay to line the council's coffers, which could very well be the case at the end of this year if we do end up with a surplus situation. So yeah, that's my response. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dale. So what we're going to do in a moment is we are going to turn to vote on the amendment. So that's the recommendation number 4. The amendment is that the council tax will be 1.99%. So that's the amendment. So Mr Sternberg, anything on the voting?
Chair, just a reminder for anybody who needs it, it's on the card to tell you which way to vote.
Thank you. Just to remind people on these finance matters, this is a recorded vote. So on the amendment, this will be recorded. So what that means is that when we finish voting, that a copy of this will be added to the minutes as a recorded version of how we voted. I think that's it. So let us go to the vote. So I'm just reminding people. Green 4, Red against, amber for abstain. Right, just any final changes in case anybody wants a moment more? No, right, show the results then please. The amendment is lost, so we return to the substantive recommendations as proposed by Councillor Kerry and seconded by Councillor Barker. Are there any other comments or questions about the substantive recommendations? Councillor Weatherall.
Yeah, it was just a question actually about the HND degree level qualifications that are needed that you mentioned, and I wondered whether...
I think we're back on HRA again.
Oh, sorry.
So can we? You can save that for part two.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I did actually pull my colleague up for you when he started debating the substantive motion, but I am going to repeat largely what he said. I mean, we didn't feel that we could support the amendment, but equally so we're being asked to vote now on the medium-term financial plan on the general account, and it doesn't look rosy, which is why obviously we didn't support the amendment. We do need to build this base as quickly as possible. Some of the projections, I would say, are unrealistic. So whilst we've got worst case scenarios in terms of where we go with the reserves, we've also got, I would say, some very favourable projections, as Ross touched on, in terms of income streams, which I don't think will necessarily be achieved. I can't support the budget as it stands because we keep coming back to a position where we're kicking the can down the road and saying we need to keep looking at this, we need to look at that, we need to find more savings. Sooner or later that's going to come knocking on the door, and I've absolute respect for Jane, so please don't take this out of context, but I've got no doubt that pretty much every council in the country at least a year or two ago had the 151 officer standing there saying exactly the same thing, and a lot of them are not finding themselves in this position anymore. I'm not using it to politically point score at all, because actually in times like this we should all be joining forces and coming up with something that is workable. So whilst yes, I think we do need to keep that 299 council tax, I think we seriously need to start looking hard and fast at where these savings are going to come from and how we are going to balance this budget in the medium term.
Thank you. And Councillor Cornwell.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So I'd actually like to just commend the new administration, who is 8 months old, not a year, in the new collaborative way of working. So 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had a joint scrutiny committee where we all collaborated. All the chairs and all the vice chairs of all the scrutiny committees had the opportunity to discuss and scrutinise the reports that are in front of you today. That was the opportunity for us to scrutinise this, and nobody had any major questions. So I just want to commend the new way of working.
Thank you. Any other comments? If not, we'd return to Councillor Barker, who's the seconder, if you've got any comments you want to make.
Not massively, but I think what Susie just said, it does have merit. We did have a meeting in here. It wasn't brilliantly attended, but no issues were raised at that meeting, and they were cross-party. We were all there. We had an opportunity to ask questions, and obviously that was an opportunity to suggest what you've suggested there. But it seemed to be a consensus, listening to what Jane had said, that the 2.99% was an acceptable increase. So I'll second the...
Thank you. I had gone to the seconder. I'm going to allow you to sneak in, Councillor Shipman, before we go back to the proposer, but only because it's you.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's just to clear up a point about the opportunities that we've all had to scrutinise this budget. We had it at the Services Scrutiny. I didn't attend the meeting at the Joint Services Committee, wherever it's called, because I was at work. But at the Services Scrutiny, I was raising points, particularly about the income streams and what's projected and where we're spending our money. And at that meeting, those questions were unanswered. So this is the opportunity where we can still raise issues going forward, and ultimately we're voting on something. We've got a debate, and councillors should, you know, be able to argue their point and try and convince the rest of the councillors to vote a certain way. But yeah, we do scrutinise the budget, but I'm still unhappy with it because I've not had the answers that I've been asking for.
Right, I'll take that as a clarification point. Councillor Kerry, right of reply.
Right of reply, I'm looking at what's been said over all the time. I do appreciate that the Conservatives left us in a reasonable position. And I've said that for a long time, but the first 4 years of the Tory administration said, we left them in a hole, and we didn't leave them in a hole. We left them virtually in the same position that they've left us in. And I've acknowledged that the Conservatives have left us in a reasonable position, but I don't think the Conservatives ever acknowledged that we left them in a reasonable position. We didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater and spend it all before a changeover occurred. I'm quite happy, and I will acknowledge that. On the other stand, the settlement and the council tax, this windfall shouldn't count for anything. It's not in our possession yet, and it is likely to be a very small amount. We're talking about 90,000. And if you take 1% off the budget this year, you will lose that 90,000 off your base rate that you will lose year on year on year. The addition is a one-off payment. If we don't go up to the full amount, we shall lose that equivalent of roughly 100,000 per year ad infinitum. It's still in times of uncertainty. We certainly won't let our reserves grow higher and higher, because I'm sure we can find something very useful to do with it. We might even get help with buses and transport and all sorts of things, and no doubt that the county council will pass down in their tight situation at least £100,000 worth of things they gave to us over the next 3 years that we'll be expected to do because they can't afford it. You know, let's take the vote and get on with it.
Thank you, Councillor Kerry, for moving the meeting on. So let's get to the vote then and get on with it. So this, just to remind you again, this is a recorded vote. So red is against, green for, and amber to abstain. So let's vote, please. Hopefully we've all voted. Keeps changing, right. So can we show the result? Oh, apparently we are showing results. Could you wait next time, please? So, as you can see, 62% for, so 1 to 8 is carried. So that's the general fund. We are going to move to the HRA, where we've got millions of questions we know that will be coming up. However, the Ricknell members will have to leave, which means, as well as myself, the Vice Chair will also have to leave. We don't have an immediate past chair, so we need to vote for someone from the body of the meeting that is able to take the chair for this part of the meeting. So do we have any nominations, please? Councillor Barker.
Can I move Councillor Lee Arts on, please?
Seconded. Thank you. Do we have any other nominations? All those in favour of Councillor Hartshorn? Anyone against? Any abstentions? You're duly elected for the next few minutes then, Councillor Hartshorn. Thank you.
Rather vacate.
Right, for this short session, I'll be taking over the chair's position. I'd like to ask Councillor Kerry as the finance person to speak, and Councillor Barker will move and second a motion to approve the recommendations. So, over to Councillor Kerry.
Thank you, Chair. I will now move on to the housing revenue account. The main point of note, as we've just heard, is the pressure being created by the increased demand and impact of regulation. Officers at the Council and Recknell Homes are working closely together to continue to provide high-quality housing services for our tenants that also meet the expectations for social housing regulator, but the associated costs of delivery are growing. In addition, the costs known to us at this time have been included in the budget and the position will be kept under review. Having taken into consideration the budget pressures, the impact on the tenants and the rent standard, which allows a rent increases of up to 7.7%, the annual rent increase we are recommending the Council for this year is 6%. As well as the 57 million investment in our stock over the next 4 years, the HRA capital programme also includes new build scheme at North Wingfield and the regeneration scheme at Stonebroom. I think what I would really like to say here is that 5% would give us an absolute break, a minimum breakthrough on the rents as they stand. When you take into consideration the new regulations that have been imposed on this year, that takes us over the 5%. We can go 7.7. In our opinion, 6 would be the way to go. And Chair, I move that move the recommendations in 8 to 13 in respect of the HRA, Chair. Thank you.
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Barker.
Just clarify it's 9 to 14.
Can we just clarify that that's parts 9 to 14 on the report?
Yeah, 9 to 14, sorry.
Right, thank you. Right, do we have any questions? Councillor Dale?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think yet again, for me, the rhetoric isn't matching the reality from Labour. Last year, we were heavily criticised for proposing a 5% increase on rents, which was 2% lower than the government ceiling, for that not being enough, given the challenges that our residents were facing. Here we are today. We know that inflation is significantly down. I think most residents will be expecting a lower increase this year, but we've got a 6% increase. And I think people can tell the difference between what you say and what you do. And I thought, for the sake of consistency, the Labour group would have gone lower than us, or at least to that 5% break-even point, to demonstrate that they really are on the side of the people that they claimed to be on the side of only last year. I think it's fair to say our group has got pretty mixed views on this, recognising the challenge for council tenants, given the ongoing pressures on household budgets. Obviously, we recognise the need to invest in housing stock, and you know, it was our administration that secured the social housing decarbonisation scheme and made huge strides forwards in terms of the insulation schemes, and we think that that's really important to continue doing, and that costs money. You know, we know that construction inflation is very significant. So I think from our perspective, we'll be abstaining, and it's for the Labour administration. You've made your bed, it's for you to lie in it, and I think that's the right approach. But as I say, it's interesting that the consistency doesn't really follow from last year and what we experienced in the chamber last year.
Thank you, Councillor Dale. Anybody else want to contribute?
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, you've not come up on the screen. You're supposed to press the.
Yes, thank you.
I'll bring you in first. Yeah, Councillor Baker. Sorry, not Barker.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. Well, I'll reiterate the question I made earlier, which I did make at the Joint Scrutiny Committee, that after the year 24-25, the rental income flatlines, and I still, despite the explanation was given, didn't quite understand why the proposed rent increase isn't baked into that. And the other thing is that depreciation is shown at 8.3 million, but that is just a book figure, isn't it? That's not an actual outgoing, unless we're planning to renew the housing stock. Could I have some enlightenment as to whether we are planning to renew the housing stock, and if so, at what period and at what rate are we planning to do that? And why the rent flatlines at 35,600,000 or thereabouts for the next 4 years? Please.
Jane, if you'd like to come in on that, please.
Certainly would, Chair. Yes, thank you very much. So, as we discussed, Councillor Baker, at the Scrutiny Committee, the rents only include the rent increase that's proposed today. So they only include the 6% that's included today. We don't build rent increases in going forward, just like we don't do council tax increases, because that is your decision in the chamber year on year on year. So it's not appropriate for me to assume rent increases year on year. That is your decision. So that's why we don't include rent increases. The reason that it flatlines is the voids. So the voids go up and down, up and down, up and down. So we tend to focus in a prudent aspect, as Councillor Dale quite rightly pointed out. I am prudent. I do have to make sure that we can, meet the expectations required. And so the voids tend to change the figure year on year on year, but they are fairly static. We also have to build in right to buys, and you'll be aware that we lose around about 60 properties a year through right to buy. So that's the answer to the first part of the question. How long have you got to talk about depreciation? So you're absolutely right, depreciation is a book entry, but we actually use it to fund the major repairs. So the major repairs reserve, which funds the capital programme, is made up of an element of depreciation and a contribution from the capital reserve as well. So it is actually used to fund the capital programme. That's how depreciation works. It's a set aside to fund the investment in the assets. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Jane. Councillor Shipman.
Thank you, Chair. I do think it's quite ironic, actually, that it appears that the Labour group and the Conservative group are pretty much two sides of the same coin. Because when you're in opposition, you'll argue one point, and then when you take control of the council, you basically just become each other and make rents increases, council tax increases, provide us with no substance to the figures, really. It's just high-level figures and high-level explanations. We've got no meat on the bone. I won't be supporting the HRA part of this budget. I have concerns about where the money's going. I've met with Lorraine about the relationship that the council has with Rickneld, and I think that needs constant review just to make sure it is the best vehicle for the council to be providing its homes. And I stand by that, and I can't support what we've got in front of us today. So I'll be voting against this. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Weatherall.
Yes. It was a question really about the comment that was made about the high-level qualifications, level 4 qualifications that are required for staff, executive housing staff. HND stroke degree, and I wondered if there'd been any investigations around using your apprenticeship levy to actually fund that. Through the apprenticeship programme, it is possible to get those level 4 qualifications and use your levy, which is could be a substantial saving.
Right, I'm going to ask Lorraine to answer that question, please.
Yes, the actual qualification is Chartered Institute of Housing as well as housing degree, but it's at level 7. So it is a higher level, and that's the difference. We do use the apprenticeship levy, but not for that particular part of it.
Right, thank you. Councillor Kerry, do you want to make a reply?
Only unless we're going to the vote, Chair.
Sorry.
We will be going to the vote after his right to reply.
Yeah, we will be going to the vote after your right to reply, that's all.
Yes, the national rent guidance is in place this year at CPI plus 1%, so that becomes 7.7 the maximum that could be charged. As with the council tax setting, the impact on tenants has to be balanced with the need to generate additional revenues. As the HRA is completely self-financed, annual rent increases are fundamental to ensuring that our homes continue to be well maintained and managed. A recent poll shows a large proportion of the council's HRA nationally are following the guidance up to the maximum. We have only just recovered from the 4 years of rent cuts, and as the report details, the cost of increased demand and regulation is creating budget pressures, and that is for the reason that we go from 5 to 6%. 7.7 less 6 is 1.7. The Conservatives told us that they had, what was it, 5, and you took it to 3. 7 and 5. Well, with 0.03 of a percent is all we're arguing about. We're nearly on the same page. Thank you. I don't want to say anything else, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kerry. Right, the vote will be taken electronically using the new system. I would like the monitoring officer to now conduct this. Once again, it will be a recorded vote.
And you vote using that one? Got somebody else's name on it. Martin Thacker's just voted in favour on it.
That's the point.
We'll make sure that's corrected in the minutes.
That will be reflected in the minutes accordingly. So, press Lee's down.
Well, just say Lee Hartshorn at the top here. And
Somebody press Lee's.
have I got 2 votes of it? Can I have that regular?
No.
Right, I presume everyone's voted and are happy with the vote. The motion has been approved. Yeah, so we've got 63% in favour, 5% against and 32% abstain. Right, I think we can now hand back to Councillor Thacker, can we?
If I might, Chair, just to make clear, the Chair will only have one vote in the recorded vote in the meeting, so that will be one fewer.
No, leave it. Leave it.
Right, I will take my seat again.
Yes, I quite agree. We were looking.
Name's changed. It's changed.
I should change the name on the
We've now got Martin Hart.
They did swap it round.
Yeah, but we now got. We'll look at it.
You're in front of me, Ali. It's already swapped.
It's right now.
Just to, do you want to actually just press me?
Just to confirm, members. Just to be clear, members, I've just had to confirm Councillor Thacker does not appear in the broadcast as having voted. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Councillor Hartshorn, for chairing the meeting. Good. Hope there are lots of HRA questions. So we now move to item 8, the Treasury Strategy Reports. So, we're back to Councillor Kerry.
The purpose of this report is to provide Council with the necessary information to approve the suite of Treasury strategies for the period 23-24 to 27-28. The strategies are compliant with both SIPFA Code of Treasury Management and the MHCLG's investment guidance. The suite comprises of 4 strategies. The Treasury Management strategy, which provides the framework for managing the Council's cash flows, borrowing and investments for the period. The Capital Strategy, which is intended to provide the high level of concise overview of how capital expenditure, capital financing and Treasury Management activity contributes to the provision of the Council's services. The Investment Strategy, which focuses on investments made for service purposes and commercial reasons rather than those made for Treasury management. And the Flexible Capital Receipt Strategy, which defines the specific use of receipts as per section 15(1)(a) of the Local Government Act 2023. This is a piece of paper that we have to approve yearly. It is nothing to do with our figures of the running of the council. It is the guidelines that all the figures that we do produce at different times and methods of payments and receipts and cash transfers and banking, etc., and the balances is actual in place. It's just the guidelines for the whole of the Treasury Management. and we are obliged once a year to bring it to the council for recommendations that we are actually keeping within that guidance. Chair, I move recommendations in recommendations 1 to 4 on the Treasury Management Strategy.
Well done. I'll second that.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? None. I don't think Councillor Kerry, you need a right of reply.
No.
Thank you. So we'll move to the vote. So you know how to vote by now. Giving anyone a second to change their mind? Right, if we show the results, please. Surprisingly carried. Thank you. So item 9, appointments to committees. So I'm going to hand over to Mr Sternberg, please.
Thank you, Chair. This report is to recommend a change to the membership of the Planning Committee for the majority group. It is recommended that Councillor Gare replaces Councillor Fawcett on Planning Committee. And the recommendation is before you. Thank you, Chair.
Do we have a mover for the recommendation?
I'll move that.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Barry. Any comments or questions? I think we'll do this one on a show of hands. All those in favour? Anyone against? Any abstentions? Thank you. That's carried. So we move to item 10, which is answering any questions from members asked under procedural rule number 9.2. So question A is from Councillor Lacey. Over to you, please, Councillor Lacey.
Thank you, Chair. Like other communities in North East Derbyshire, many residents of Killamarsh rely on the public transport network to see family and friends, go to work, go shopping and for their leisure activities. Yet bus services in our village are unreliable and continue to deteriorate, leaving many people stranded. Whilst responsibility for local bus services do not rest with this council, residents look to us to champion their cause. Would the leader of the council agree to raise these concerns of Killamarsh residents with both Derbyshire County Council and the local bus companies?
Councillor Barker to reply.
Thank you. Yeah, and, thanks for your question. Yeah, I'm sure the simple answer to this is yes, because I know it's a big issue for the local bus services have been, not just in Killamarsh, but all around the district, including Holy Moorside, Morton, Homewood, Pilsley, and even Clay Cross and North Wingfield, my village, which by comparison have got better services, but they are becoming more unreliable. I was stood waiting 3/4 of an hour all the day for a bus flipping thing. But rightly recognise this council does not have a responsibility for public transport, but that doesn't mean that we can't act as a local voice of a community. So I'll give you a commitment that after today I will raise your concern with the county council and ask what they are doing and are proposing to do address this issue. After talking to the county council, I will also be more willing to speak to the local bus companies if needs be. And I'll report back to you, Councillor Lacey, with the outcome of these conversations so that you can report back to your constituents on why they are having these problems and what this and other agencies are doing to resolve them.
Do you have a supplementary question, Councillor Lacey?
Can I be cheeky and ask if you can arrange for there to be a bus link to the tram stop at Halfway, as people do depend a lot on the tram to get to other areas in Sheffield?
Councillor Barker to reply to the cheeky question.
Oh yeah. No, that's fair enough. I think that's a fair question. It's something that I think people have mentioned to me in past, not just from Killamarsh but from Eckington, about trying to have a better connectivity between Killamarsh, Eckington and that tramway at Halfway, because it's not far, but it's far enough if you've got to walk it. So I shall definitely bring that up as well as with the conversations I have. Thank you.
Thank you. And question B then, Councillor Dale to Councillor Pickering.
Thank you, Chair. Does the Cabinet member believe that decisions made by the Planning Committee should be consistent with local and national planning policies?
Councillor Pickering to reply.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Dale. Do I believe that decisions made by the Planning Committee should be consistent with planning national policy? Yes. But for Councillor Dale's information, of course, planning law does set out that decisions on planning applications must be determined in accordance with the development plan. Thank you, Chair.
Supplementary question, Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Councillor Pickering, for the response. In order to ensure those decisions are compliant with the policy and in the interest of the reputation of the Council, does the Cabinet member also believe it's important for all members of the committee to engage meaningfully during the discussion and the debate on applications, offering fair scrutiny and challenge to officers and articulating why they've arrived at certain conclusions? And if so, can he confirm if he's spoken to the Labour members of the committee who've been the subject of complaints for failing to do that and essentially remaining entirely silent during meetings?
Two questions in one. Councillor Pickering to reply.
There are two questions, Chair, thank you. I've not personally received any complaints, and it's not for me to instruct members on how they conduct themselves in committees. It's how they feel comfortable with that and what questions they might want to ask.
Thank you. Question C then, Councillor Cupit.
Thank you, Chair. So it's a question to Councillor Barker. Given its potential impact on communities in this district, could the Leader of the Council explain why North East Derbyshire District Council have offered no objections or concerns to the current planning application AVA 2023-0764 for 185 new homes, which is currently being considered by Amber Valley Borough Council?
Councillor Barker to reply.
Yeah, thank you. And to be honest, Charlotte, I'm a bit surprised with this question. And I'm sure you're aware that really it's not good practice for other councils to get involved with neighbouring authorities planning things, because unless there's a really strong case that that development would affect our local plan. However, whilst not objecting to the development, it would work out that we did submit some comments, and I've got them written down here. So, because we asked that the heritage assessment should include an assessment of the development on the settings of the designated heritage asset within North East Derbyshire, including particular Sherland Lodge Farmhouse, the cluster of listed buildings within Amber Mill and Toad Hole Conservation Area. We also commented that conditions should be included, that appropriate design and landscaping be included to minimise the visual impact of the development upon countryside, and to maintain a visual separation between the built settlement of Alfreton and Sherland Parish. And I'm also aware that officers did comment in relation to potential housing sites in this general area when Amber Valley were doing their local plan consultation. So given that, I'm not sure what you're really alluding to.
A supplementary question, Councillor Cupit.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Barker, for your reply. I think it's exactly that you've just mentioned, that it seems there's a bit of a gap between the comments and the sort of objections and concerns that the Council submitted when the site was considered for the core strategy or their draft local plan, and then at this stage when it is a full application, albeit a speculative one, because I know Amber Valley haven't got a local plan, that we haven't raised those same concerns other than the heritage aspect.
But what's the question?
Particularly given, so it's just to ask how do you reconcile the two and why we haven't continued raising those exact concerns that we raised previously, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Barker to reply to that.
I'll just read this bit out. I don't know if it answers your question, but it's off the thing that we submitted. But it says, in conclusion of conditions on any approval, that any reserved matter proposal include appropriate design and landscaping to minimise the visual impact of the development upon countryside to the north and to maintain their visual separation between the built settlement. So to me, that's saying that when they come back reserved matters, we've already put that into the system. So, and I did look on site, there were 32 pages of objections to this thing. So I think they've got enough objections without us particularly getting involved.
And question D then, Councillor Adlington Stringer.
Thank you, Chair. Question to Councillor Pickering. This council promised to be a cleaner council and to review the road sweeping regime. Residents in Wingleworth have had particular issues given the recent flooding, but even without excessive water, drains across our village are routinely blocked. And so I'm wondering when this plan will come into place, what it will look like, and how you plan to alleviate the concerns of so many of my residents. Thank you.
Councillor Pickering to reply.
Thank you, Councillor Adlington Stringer, for that. Two parts in that, really. The neglected and blocked drains are the responsibility of Derbyshire County Council. And we do some work on behalf of them. They contract that out to us. And due to recent events that you just alluded to, the County Council have redistributed elements of the gully and emptying schedule to ensure that problem drains are serviced more regularly. For us, with the street cleansing, yes, a review will take place. It's been in the scope of a lot of bigger works. We've got the new depot that's been mentioned, but more specifically, the street cleansing is a more detailed piece of work, and that's due to commence in April this year, in just a couple of 3 months. Recommendations for any service change will be presented following that review.
Thank you. And do you have a supplementary question, Councillor Adlington Stringer?
Thank you. Will you be willing to engage with the County Council to cover this shortfall, this gap, and particularly given their tremendous mismanagement of their budget? How will we, as two separate authorities, make sure that residents are getting value for money, they're getting the services that we promised them between councils, making sure that no gaps are left? Thank you.
Councillor Pickering to reply.
Thank you, Chair. As far as the street cleansing is concerned, as I said, the review will take place. We'll present any changes. In the meantime, if customers are concerned about debris, residents are concerned about debris, they can contact Street Scene, who will try to clear them as a priority. Of course, we'll talk to Derbyshire County Council. It's their funding pot we're dependent on at the end of the day. And we know what kind of a mess they're in there, whether they set their council tax rates higher or lower, it'll be entirely up to them. But we're dependent on that contract from Derbyshire County Council.
Thank you. So I move to item 11 to consider any motions from members under procedure rule number 10. So motion A is proposed by Councillor Weatherall. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. And if Council will bear with me, I have a side of A4 actually to read out regarding safety measures on the A632. The A632 bisects Ashover Ward between Spike Winter and the top of Slack Hill, and is a well-known and renowned trouble spot for traffic collisions and accidents. I'm sure you're all aware of the road. From August 23 to December 23, there were 4 deaths on this road, and 3 of these occurred in the 2 weeks before Christmas. In addition to the fatalities, there are countless collisions every week, some of which are reported to the police and some not. This is a dangerous road and is well known to be a dangerous road. The leader of Derbyshire County Council in a recent parish council meeting described it as probably the most dangerous road in Derbyshire. Our MP, Derbyshire County Council, myself as District Councillor and the local parish council are in regular contact with each other, and every time there is another death or serious incident, an investigation takes place that confirms that a variety of aspects of that road make it very dangerous. One aspect that all agree is a factor is the speed that some motorists achieve on what's called the Flying Mile and Slack Hill, particularly the run up to the hill. As a result, 50-mile-per-hour speed limits have been imposed along most of the stretch of this road, with 40 miles per hour limits through Kelstedge, which is approximately a quarter of a mile stretch. Although these speed limits have been imposed, there are no enforcement measures in place. And Derbyshire County Council data from April last year shows that this speed limit is routinely flouted by motorists. Halfway up Slack Hill, 52% of motorists are going faster than the 50-mile-per-hour limit. Over a 6-day speed data collection period by DCC in April last year, 5,014 vehicles were exceeding the speed limit and 4%, 385 vehicles, were travelling above 70 miles per hour, with 24 vehicles travelling between 90 and 110 miles per hour, halfway up Slack Hill. This is law breaking on an industrial scale and is leading to increasing fatalities and near misses that amount to distress for the community who witness these, the emergency services who have to deal with these incidents, and anguish for the families of the deceased, injured and traumatised. Derbyshire Police have confirmed in writing that for the whole of Derbyshire, there are merely 3 enforcement vans and 1 enforcement motorcycle, and that unfortunately, because there is no safe place, for example hard standing, to locate one of these vans or the motorcycle on the A632, they cannot enforce routinely. The local community also acknowledge that periodic enforcement is not an effective deterrent, as motorists inform each other through social media of the presence of the vans and flash each other warnings to slow down to avoid detection. Having said this, Derbyshire Police have had a very visible presence over the past few weeks, and the community have noted this and are very grateful. Derbyshire Police have confirmed in writing that average speed cameras are needed on the A632 to reduce collisions. Whilst the accident investigations show that there are complexities associated with all the accidents, all parties agree that enforcing reduced speeds will ensure that excessive speed is not a factor in any future collisions. Highways is a service delivered by Derbyshire County Council, and we are fortunate to have Councillor Cupit as Cabinet Member for Highways and Transport for Derbyshire County Council, also a North East Derbyshire District Councillor. I've noted her declaration earlier, and I understand that position. Thank you. I would urge us all to make whatever commitments we can to work closely together and with all key stakeholders and partner agencies locally and nationally to ensure that average speed cameras are installed on the A632 as quickly as possible in 2024, so that there is a consequent reduction in road traffic collisions, serious accidents and deaths. North East Derbyshire councillors and officers' views and ideas will be welcomed by the Ashover Community Action Group, who have asked me to be their spokesperson, and to urge anyone who might be able to help expedite consistent enforcement through average speed cameras on this stretch of the A632. All constructive ideas or help that can be given will be gratefully received. And the sorts of things that I was thinking of was letters of support, letters and personal testimonies of anybody who's seen an accident there or been involved in an accident that we can collect, as we are doing now, and present to the authorities. And it's a complex mixture of stakeholders and authorities that are involved. But we just want to demonstrate the strength of feeling, really, and we ask this council to help in whatever way that they possibly can. Thank you, Chair.
Can I take it, Councillor Weatherall, that you're formally moving the motion then as set as down on page 3 of the agenda?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Are you reserving your right to speak?
Can I speak now?
Yes, of course you can. Yeah.
Just to say yes, I will be seconding the motion. Whilst I acknowledge not all accidents are down to speed, I think this motion makes perfect sense, and I will be seconding and hope that other members will, or all of the members will do the same, purely from a public safety point of view. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barker.
Yeah, thanks, Alan, for this motion, and I know how passionate you are about it, and how you've just what you've just said, and I know you've been affected personally by one of the accidents, and I also appreciate the community concern in the village. I'd also want to pass on my sympathies to the families of the people who died recently in that accident at Christmas, and I can assure you that I will do whatever I can to assist you in your campaign and to try to make this road and some of its junctions as safe as possible. I think we all accept that the A632 has had more than its share of accidents. However, preventing them, further ones, is not easy, given there's multiple reasons why it's so dangerous. Road safety is, as you recognise, is an issue for the Highway Authority and the police. But having said that, my group are more than happy to support your motion, and whatever the outcome of today's vote, perhaps we could agree to meet at a future date to determine how you think this council can best help you in your campaign. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely echo Councillor Barker's comments and understand the concern that this is a very sensitive issue. Clearly, any fatalities or injuries on any of our roads are an absolute tragedy and a real cause for concern. And our sympathies absolutely will also go to the families who've lost loved ones. I think all of us across the chamber want to see action on improving road safety across Derbyshire's roads. That's reflected in, I know various members from across the chamber will take part in things like Community Speed Watch, and obviously we've seen some development in terms of SIDS in some roads, but as Councillor Barker articulated, it's not always an easy matter to resolve. There are often, a huge number of complicating factors. As Councillor Weatherall said, Councillor Lewis, as the local county councillor, is as equally as concerned as you are, and has been, I know, regularly emailing the police about the issues and pushing for solutions locally in the same way. I think the scope of the motion, from our perspective, very clearly falls under DCC and the police. I think there's little that any DDC can do from a practical perspective. And while we obviously support the intent of the motion, I think our group would rather abstain on the basis of that being a county council matter. But we'll happily speak to Barry and to Charlotte, who obviously can't speak now, about the issue external to this meeting to see what we can do to support.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Chair. I was actually just going to say something then that tweaked kind of at the end. This to me isn't a political issue, it isn't a partisan issue, it's a matter of conscience. Yes, as people say, it is outside of our remit, but that's not actually what Councillor Weatherall is asking for. She's asking us as a council to do what we can. And I think obvious condolences, which are just words, when someone's lost someone in such a horrible way, nobody can ever express it or express genuine regret unless they've been through it themselves. But I would say unquestionably she would have my backing, and I would have hoped from fully across the chamber, because as I say, this to me is a personal conscience issue. It's not a partisan one at all.
Thank you. Councillor Adlington Stringer.
Thank you, Chair. Just to echo Councillor Hancock's words there, that this isn't a party political issue at all, and that my thanks with Councillor Weatherall for bringing this to our attention, and I hope that we do give this our full support today. It's only right. My thoughts are with those that have been impacted by this failure of road management, and I hope that we can find a solution. As the ward member for Wingleworth, we often encounter this patch of road, and I've often found myself actually once upon a time broken down halfway up and having to roll back down. Yes, it was quite an interesting experience. So I think that more can be done. The road needs to be made safer in a lot of different ways, but this is a great first step, and hopefully we see action from the County Council given our full support today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? If not, then could we move to the vote?
Right of reply.
Oh, sorry, yes, I should have. Apologies. Councillor Weatherall, right of reply.
Okay, no, just to thank Council really for consideration of this motion, and any support that you can give will be gratefully received, very much so.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Weatherall, and apologies for that. So we'll move to the vote on motion 8. last few moments to let the voting settle. If we could see the results, please. That's it. Overwhelmingly for, so the motion is passed. Thank you. Motion B then, proposed by Councillor Dale. Over to you.
Okay, sorry, thank you, Chair. Appreciate that the motion may appear to be parochial, but I just want to assure everyone from across the chamber that this is not the case at all. While the application may have come forward in my ward, its approval for me has far-reaching consequences for the whole district, and for me it sets a dangerous precedent as far as settlement development limits and the Greenbelt are concerned, which we know covers all of the district in one way or another. I won't dwell on all the finer details either. Hopefully the motion summarises fairly well what has happened with this application, but I would encourage members to review the recording of the meeting and watch the debate for yourselves to see why it matters. But very briefly, for those who are unaware, the application hinged on local plan policy LC3, which sets 5 really important tests which all need to be met in order to permit limited affordable housing to meet local community needs outside of settlement development limits, including within the Greenbelt. In the case of this application, there were serious doubts and concerns over whether 3 of those tests had been met adequately, and indeed whether a proposal of 38 homes could ever be considered limited when it's adjacent to the nearest settlement development limit, which comprises just 27 homes. The 3 tests in question included whether development was in keeping with the character and landscape of the nearest settlement development limit area, and whether all plausible alternatives had been adequately exhausted. I think it's worth pointing out that within a mile of Unston, there are about 100 affordable homes which are either in development, recently developed, or with planning permission. Perhaps the most important test, though, was LC3A, which required the application to demonstrate it was meeting a proven local community need, supported by an up-to-date local housing needs survey. In this case, the survey was conducted, but only demonstrated a need for 7 properties, not the 38 which were put forward as part of this application. How do we reconcile the difference? Well, a series of figures were then put forward from our own housing strategy team to try to demonstrate a higher demand for affordable housing in Unston. The problem with those figures was that they were taken at face value and they weren't subject to virtually any scrutiny at all by the officer in the officer report, or sadly, although there was some at committee, not as much as should have been. They included one figure as an example for those on the housing waiting list with a local community connection to Unston, being 505 people. But when I dug into that with the housing strategy team, it turned out that figure also included anyone with a local connection to all of Drumfield, Colaston, Eckington, Renishaw, Marsh Lane, Ridgeway and Barlow. On a population basis, Unston only makes up about 5% of that wider area. So it's reasonable to assume that that figure has basically been inflated by 20 times to what the actual realistic number would be for Unston. And I'm extremely concerned that the committee was given potentially misleading figures to justify a particular decision, which may have been non-compliant with policy. And more to the point, the policy wording is very specific that only a local housing needs survey can be relied upon. It doesn't go on to say if that figure doesn't give you the figure that you want, if that survey doesn't give you the figure that you want, you can then go and layer on additional information to demonstrate a local need. I'm really concerned about the precedent that this sets, because effectively any area that is desirable to live, where there are a large number of bids for properties, for example, on the housing waiting list, which is a lot of areas in North East Derbyshire, it could potentially mean that settlement development limits don't mean anything anymore. A developer can come forward with a site outside of the settlement development limit, potentially in the Greenbelt, apply for planning permission, get the housing strategy team to support them, because essentially it's their job to promote housing growth. You know, that's their role. So why wouldn't they? And you know, Bob's your uncle. You've got a planning application approved. In this particular case, there were complaints received, and to be fair to the officers, to Lee and David, I'm really pleased that the council have stopped short of issuing the decision notice, and you are investigating it. You've sought legal advice, and I really think that, for me, demonstrates a really humble and decent approach. This is about checking, you know, if we have made the wrong decision or if there is any doubt over the decision, we should hold our hands up, you know, take that time to review it and get to the bottom of it. But that it is an unusual step for committee to make a decision and then the decision notice not to be issued straight away. We have gone sort of beyond what we would normally do here in going and getting that additional advice and reconsidering, and I understand that process is still ongoing. But from my perspective, from a governance perspective, it should surely have to go back to committee, whatever the outcome. Now, that legal advice might say, well, you're fine, you're okay, you can make the, you know, the decision stands. But from my perspective, because it's gone outside of the normal process, that full advice and the full officer recommendations in light of that advice ought to go back to the committee. So this application is really asking for that application. This motion is really asking for that application to go back to the committee with that advice, regardless of what it says, whether it says for or against, whatever. I really think it's important that the committee get the opportunity to consider it again, and residents also get the opportunity to make those representations in light of what the advice says. I think it's important that it's transparent and open, and that's the purpose really behind this motion. So, yeah, as I say, that's the core purpose behind it, and I'm happy to move it as it's written. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dale. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Cupit, you wanting to speak now?
I'll reserve the right to speak.
Thank you. Right, so second by Councillor Cupit. Any comments? Councillor Shipman.
Thank you, Chair. I am in support of this. I don't know all the ins and outs of the actual application itself, and I think that's quite irrelevant to what we're debating here, because as you'll remember, when I tried to do this same thing for the Clay Lane development, which was to get it looked at by planning, the council at the time refused to even send it back to be looked at. And I think that's a bad position and way that this council should operate. I think if something new has come to light, or we're concerned about the way that a decision has been made, it makes perfect sense to send it back to the planning committee just to look at. It may be that they arrive at the exact same decision that they did in the first place, but time is crucial when it comes to planning decisions, because if they start the development, it then starts costing this council more money if we do end up at the position where you revoke that planning application. So therefore, I will be supporting this motion. I would also like to suggest an amendment, which is to add a third point, which is that standards look at a mechanism to enable applications to be reconsidered at planning committee once that decision has already been taken, because there's no mechanism that exists other than it coming to full council for us to approve to send it back to planning. It needs like a third of the planning committee to be able to put it on the agenda again, or the chair can put it on the agenda again. But having come to full council every time, where we've got 53 councillors to decide whether we even just look at a decision again, just seems insane to me. And I think we need to change the standing orders to have that mechanism in place. So that would be my amendment. I don't know if the proposer and seconder would accept that as a friendly one, so we don't have to debate and vote on it. But that's what I would do, and I would definitely support this motion just from a practical point of view of looking at our decisions again and just double checking that it is the correct one. Thank you, Chair.
Dale.
I'm happy to take it as a friendly emotion on the basis that I think it's legitimate. We ought to have a process for referring back that doesn't involve full council. And just to highlight, I think on the Clay Lane application, the challenge there was that the development was already half built, and I think you're absolutely right. In this scenario, is not the case. And actually, in future decisions, if we had a quicker mechanism by which to do this, it would, necessitate having to wait for the next full council meeting, which could be a couple of months, 3 months. If it happens in August, it's even longer, obviously. So,
just to tie up loose ends, have you a seconder for your friendly amendment? Councillor Hancock, thank you. And that's been accepted as a third point to the motion. So the standards look at a mechanism to amend standing orders, basically to bring in planning. So, yes, please, just to make sure we've got the right wording.
The standards committee look at a mechanism to enable applications to be recalled back to planning committee.
Okay. So that's been accepted as a friendly amendment, so we're still continuing to debate the original motion as is. Councillor Pickering.
Thank you, Chair. all I've got to say on this really is, you know, the motion to refer it back is a bit like putting the cart before the horse. It's been to a committee, material considerations will have been taken into account. You know, it's been admitted that things are now thrown into question, and it's going now through due process. We've taken external advice, there'll be legal advice on that, and if the advice that comes back at the end of that due process is that it needs to go back to planning with some other things to be considered, then we wouldn't have any objection to. I mean, that's the way it needs to go. But to determine that before there's anything new come to light, you know, what's the point? So I think really we need to get the due process and the inquiry and the investigation complete. We need to get the advice back from that. And then determine from there why it will be going back to planning committee and what the reasons would be. As I said, it's putting the cart before the horse. It's preempting any outcome or decision. I can't support this motion, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I sit on planning committee and have done for quite a long time, so I'm not going to debate the ins and outs of this. It's because that's the place, the forum for it. The key thing here, which I think is picking up on the point Councillor Pickering has just made, there is no other mechanism for doing it. So we can't really put a conditional motion in front of council here that if we get legal advice back and if the legal advice says this, we will agree to do this. So I think the spirit of the motion that's here is that we actually refer it back with that external legal advice once it comes. So I think in order to facilitate it and stop it costing the council an absolute small fortune, we need to move actually pass this resolution today, because obviously, as we know, any unnecessary delays in the planning system lead to huge costs, and that is something that we can't pass. I think, as Councillor Dale said earlier, if it goes back and the decision is the same, then so be it. But it's as Ross has said earlier, it's a failing in our own standing orders, our own constitution, that we don't have any alternative mechanism for doing this. So I'm fully supportive of the motion that's in front of us.
Thank you. And Councillor Gillett.
If I deal first of all with the amendment, whatever the outcome of the substantive motion, I'm slightly concerned about the amendment, but the undertaking I will give is that we are reviewing the Constitution as we speak. There's a meeting tomorrow about it, and we will raise it there irrespective of what happens here, so that we can actually look into it and have some proper advice and determine whether that is an appropriate thing to do, because I am slightly worried that we're about to turn the full council into an appellant body for planning matters, and that does indeed worry me, because planning is a quasi-judicial function that has to follow set rules. Now, this all seems to me to be about process and whether we're following the right process or not. And Councillor Dale, quite rightly, and I understand why he did it, he asked a question earlier about process and then had some criticisms about whether the process was duly followed. And now we've been asked to adopt something completely different. But the answer to that question that you asked, Councillor Dale, was in terms of should proper national and local planning policies be followed? It's a clear yes. Nobody in this room would say anything otherwise, and you knew that before you asked the question. But the need to comply with national and local planning policies is one of the reasons we have a planning committee, where we have members of this authority who are trained in that, who have proper office advice, both legal and planning, before they make decisions, to try and ensure that they do take decisions that are considered to be consistent with local and national planning policies. Well, I'm being asked to take a planning decision today in many respects, but I'm not a matter of the planning committee and never have been. I have no planning training. I don't claim to be familiar with the case or with local or national planning policies that are pertinent to this application. I've received no officer advice or guidance on this case. I haven't read any report to deal with it, or I can't claim to fully understand all the issues involved. I'm not familiar with the arguments for or against it. All I only know is what Councillor Dale has told us today, both orally and in his motion, nor do I profess to understand the planning consequences of the decision I'm being invited to take today.
This is about process. This is not about the application itself. That's the planning committee to take that decision.
But perhaps Councillor will have the courtesy to let me finish, because I think this is what I'm saying. This is about process, and I'm being asked to take a decision to refer something back to a planning committee. That is a process, and I don't think this is the right process to go through for making that decision. So, as I say, Councillor Dale has told us that we've had some external legal advice. I don't know what that advice is, but I accept it's been sought. It could be about process, it could be about judicial review, or it could be about the merits of the application. I simply don't know. Nobody's told me what the actual issue is. It sounds like it's judicial review rather than about the process of the application, the merits of the application, but I don't know. And we haven't received that advice. What I do know, and I should say, you know, that doesn't apply to me, but what I do know is I'm not the only person in that position today. There's lots of members of this council who are in exactly that same position. And yet, as I say, we're being asked to refer this back to planning without understanding whether that's the right thing to do, both legally and in terms of planning conditions. The one thing I do know is that both Councillor Pickering and Councillor Hartshorn, as the chair of the planning committee, if they receive professional advice from the head of planning and the Director of Legal Services to refer this matter back, I have no doubt whatsoever that they will do that. And in that sense, there is already a process for doing it. And the process is that when we get a complaint that suggests we're not doing that, it goes to those people and to the planning officers and the head of legal, and they will give the appropriate advice. So I think there is a mechanism for doing it, but I accept it might not be the best mechanism, which is why I say we will undertake it, take it away and have a proper review of it. I also want to pick up what Councillor Shipman said about Clay Lane, because that's always at the back of my mind when it comes to planning as well. And that was a case where there was strong local opposition from the residents, there was strong local opposition from the local members, and the members, some members of the planning committee spoke out against it. And they continued to speak out against it, even when it came to light that there might have been a factual evidence in some of the advice. Don't forget, I was interrupted though, Chair.
I've factored that in. It's like football, this.
It is.
There'll be 9 minutes of extra time.
So we've been asked to give weight to that, Chair. But so for those reasons, we're being asked to follow process at the planning meeting. I don't think we're following it today. As I say, I'm more than happy to take away and look at the process and see whether there is a better process than this. But I can't vote for it today until somebody tells me that this process that we're being invited to adopt today is both legally and in planning terms the correct process.
Thank you, Councillor Gillett. Just to be clear about the amendment, it was subsumed as a friendly amendment into this motion, so there isn't a conversation to vote on an amendment and then this. This is the substantive motion that we're actually discussing.
Chair, may I just raise a point of order, because this is something that's been said a couple of times in meetings. Planning is not a quasi-judicial committee. Licensing is, planning isn't. And I know that's the second time in a few months that Councillor Gillett has actually said that.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Right, we are going to vote on motion B. Just to point out, there is that third.
Councillor Cupit
before. Yes, so we've got Councillor Cupit, but I just want to be clear when we do come to vote, there is now a third point added, which is about Standards Committee looking at a mechanism to enable a recall for planning applications. So that will be in. So, Councillor Cupit.
Councillor Dale.
Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Chair. Just try and cover off some of the points that have been made. Councillor Pickering said that material considerations were taken into account. I think the whole point of this is that there were some errors in the information, or there was certainly some misleading information that wasn't picked up. So you have a case where material considerations may have been taken into account which were not true. And I think that is really quite worrying from my perspective. You've got a situation where we've made a decision on the basis of one set of information which the rug may be being pulled from under us. The points about legal advice, from my perspective, and Mrs Sternberg, please close your ears because this is no criticism, but legal advice is very, very rarely clear-cut. It's never black or white. There is a range of views, considerations, a balance to be struck. So it's quite possible that the legal advice will come back and say, well, you might be okay, but there is a bit of a risk here. Now, for me, it's officers that have taken that decision to go and get that legal advice. As far as Planning Committee officially knows, they don't even know that's happened. It's not been reported to them in any way, as far as I can see. Officers have taken a decision, and rightly so in my opinion, outside of the usual process and gone and got legal advice Now, whatever that legal advice should be has to go back to committee from my perspective, because that's proper governance. That's what councils are supposed to do. We have a governance process. It's we as elected members that make decisions, and something unusual has happened here. And whatever that legal advice may be, it probably won't be completely clear-cut. There'll be a balance to be struck. So it has to go back to committee. And all this is seeking to do. I mean, I really struggled, to be honest, with Councillor Gillett's mental gymnastics on this, because we were talking about process and then we weren't talking about process. And I mean, this is outside of the usual process. It's subject to legal challenge, whatever we do. We're not being asked to make a planning decision. We're asking to send it back to planning committee with advice that we've sought externally, with investigations, and it's not just legal advice. That we're actually, as I understand it, officers are also reviewing the housing strategy officer information that was supplied to try and make sure that that was correct. So there's not just legal advice. We're asking all of that bundle of information to go back to planning committee so they can decide whether they made the right decision originally or not, and have another opportunity to change it. And I don't think we should wait for the legal advice to decide that. I think we should make the commitment that we will do that, come what may, because that's the appropriate thing to do in a situation where we've gone outside of the usual process. So yeah, I'm happy to move to the vote, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will move to the vote. So let's have that on the screen, please. Okay. Hopefully you've made your final decision. Could we show the results, please? So the motion is lost. Motion C then, proposed by Councillor Adlington Stringer.
Thank you, Chair. The last motion which I brought to Council was considered by some of you to be highly controversial. And whilst a ceasefire in Gaza is still urgently needed, this month I'm taking on a challenge known to parents across the world. I'm asking you to eat your greens. My first job was on a butcher's counter in Morrison's supermarket. Making burgers and mopping up blood was, perhaps surprisingly, once a normal part of my day-to-day routine. My plant-based journey began at the same time I started to engage with politics and social issues. I started to question the world by first considering my own personal actions. We welcome in the new year as 2023 was declared the hottest year on record. The devastating impact of flooding in our area is all too real reminder of such. Reflecting as we do at the start of each year reminds us that it's now 5 years since this council declared a climate emergency. Whilst many positive changes have been made, and I thank you for those, there still remain many small wins that are yet to be taken full advantage of. I know that this council, which has demonstrated its commitment to protecting our environment by initiating the first ever Environment Scrutiny Committee, will be keen to adopt these changes. The switch to plant-based catering is a simple step that this council can take to tackle the climate crisis and promote healthier eating choices. Nationwide, animal agriculture is responsible for 47% of the UK's methane emissions and 68% of our nitrous oxide emissions. The problem is reflected here in North East Derbyshire too. The council's own report states that 0.9% of North East Derbyshire's emissions are from agriculture, whilst a huge 6.9%, that's nearly 7%, of our emissions are from livestock. The cost of rearing animals for consumption is one of the leading causes of emissions in our area. Researchers at Oxford University found that vegan plant-based diets result in a 75% less climate heating emissions, water pollution and land use than diets which included 100 grams of meat each day. 100 grams of meat each day is 4 wafer-thin slices of beef. About £2.30 from Tesco, I checked. Some of you may be thinking that increasing soy production is responsible for rapid deforestation, and yes, you are right. 77% of that soy, however, is used to feed livestock. In fact, more soy is used for biodiesel production than the 2.6% required for the world's tofu. So what about organic free-range meat? Deforestation for the soy which feeds our livestock pales in comparison to the land used to graze our animals. The meat with the lowest impact is organic pork, but that is still responsible for 8 times more climate change than the highest impact plants, which are seed oils. Half of the world's habitable land is used for agriculture, with most of this used to raise livestock and dairy. In England alone, a whopping 68% of the total land mass is used for agriculture. If everyone shifted to a plant-based diet, we would reduce global land use for agriculture by 75%. That is because it takes 100 times more land to produce a kilogram of protein from beef or lamb than it does from peas or tofu. Only 6% of the UK is urbanised, meaning that eating more plants creates a solution to the climate crisis, to the housing crisis, whilst also allowing native species to thrive. It's beyond doubt that a plant-based diet will reduce emissions, clean up our waterways, increase biodiversity, ease the housing crisis and stop suffering for animals, all whilst providing you with just as much, if not more, nutritional value. Yet the reduce, reuse, recycle, rethink climate change strategy of the previous council administration does not mention the words vegan, vegetarian, food, diet or farms once. We must show leadership as a council and empower our residents, whether they are farmers or consumers, to make climate-friendly choices. I hope that as we embark on 2024, we are able to support local farmers in transitioning with us. For years, the heroes that feed us have been thrown to one side and squeezed out by big business. It's time that we reward the custodians of our land for their hard work in feeding our nation by ensuring that they are future ready and able to capitalise sustainably on the future food market. Let's make your parents proud and start this pea eating journey together as a community. Who knows, your taste buds might enjoy the ride too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Weatherall, do you wish to speak now?
Can I reserve that?
Certainly. So, Councillor Barker.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. And it's good that you only submit uncontentious motions. Pleased to have you here. Just last May, though, that we went against conventions and gave you a role as the Vice Chair at Scrutiny Committee. And we did that with the belief that opposition members would take it seriously and act responsibly and use that opportunity to raise concerns like these at their meetings and hopefully not just score political points. And we specifically asked you to be the Vice Chair at Environment Committee. That was no accident with your background and the speech you've just made, which were very good. You didn't convince me, though. Turning to the motion itself, I can't support it as it currently stands. I've made clear that before that the Council, and it's now part of the Constitution, that we do not consider motions that commit this Council to a change in policy or which spend money without the proposal going through due process, which includes proper officer advice, and it's not a responsible way to acting when spending taxpayers' money. I know from a brief discussion with officers that the motion you propose is not a straightforward matter and has some complexities that might not be obvious at first sight. They tell me that it will involve choices being made if the Council were to go down this route and that it has financial implications for North East Derbyshire. Having said that, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm saying we shouldn't adopt it, this policy. It just means that we should take our responsibility seriously and only make decisions after due process and full consideration of all the relevant facts and issues. With that in mind, I would like to suggest 1 or 2 courses. Either that you withdraw the motion in the knowledge that my group will support you if you took it to the Environment Scrutiny Committee to conduct a review into the proposals you raised. And if that's not acceptable, I would ask that you accept an amendment to the motion to the effect that Council refers the motion to the Environment Scrutiny Committee for consideration and that the committee then submit a report to Cabinet detailing the outcome of those deliberations. I hope you think that's a fair way forward, and I know you're passionate about your stuff, Frank, it's good, and I accept that you may want a quick word with your seconder to decide how to proceed. If, however, you're willing to accept either of those courses of action, I want to proceed to a vote on the motion as printed. And my group, would have no choice but to vote against the motion.
It's like Dragon's Den. Do you want to go to the wall?
Hey!
Yep.
Councillor Adlington Stringer?
Yeah, I'm happy for it to go to scrutiny. It's a decision which I was able to take overnight before, and it saved me money and wasn't very complex at all. Just required a shopping list. But for as this council's seen, we can throw things backwards and forwards. We'll go through scrutiny. If that's the way we have to do it, that's the way we'll do it.
So are you withdrawing the motion? Or are you wanting it added?
I'm wanting it added as an amendment.
Right. So we're adding now that a 4 considered scrutiny. Okay. So added. Councillor Dale.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It won't surprise Councillor Adlington Stringer to know that I can't support the motion. Two main reasons, and I will just start by saying that actually, from a health perspective, I had started to today.
Sorry,
for example,
just a moment. We've got. Can we just have one meeting, please, Councillor Dale?
Today, for example, I'm on a fully vegetarian diet. I'm taking some bold steps. Actually, from having looked into it a bit more from a health perspective, I've not completely eliminated meat yet, and don't intend to. But I'm trying to cut down for various different reasons. I think that's each to our own. I even tried tofu the other day, which was an experience.
I'll invite you around for dinner.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, sounds good. The two main reasons for me are, I think really I'm pro-choice. I don't really agree with the council influencing what people want to eat in this way. This is about us all making an informed choice, and would sort of support some of what you say in terms of people looking at what's out there in terms of the information. But I think that's incumbent upon all of us to do that. And I think the second point is, you mentioned farmers, but times are tough for farmers, and diversification is not easy. And fundamentally, we're a rural district. We've got countless farmers across the district who do a very good job, and animal standards in this country are very good. And I think I want to really praise the work that our farming community do in rearing good meat and good dairy produce. And I think it's slightly surprising that the motion has been seconded by someone, and Councillor Weatherall, who represents the largest farming community. So looking forward to hearing what she has to say. So yeah, while I can't completely disagree with everything that Councillor Adlington Stringer has said, I can't support the motion because I just don't think this is the role of a council, and I don't think we can go against our farming community in such a way.
Thank you. Councillor Welton.
Yeah, it comes on, great. Okay, I agree with all the comments that were made by Councillor Dale. I think this is coercive, it's authoritarian. We should have the right to respect each other's lifestyles. I've worked and known many very strict vegans, particularly when I was living in Asia, Buddhists, Jains, Hindus, fully respect the ability to live the life they want. That should also be reciprocated as well. Just coming on to I'm going to talk about hard pasture and cheese. An unintended consequence of this would be the banning of Stilton cheese. We're one of the 4 counties, Leicestershire, Rutland, although it doesn't exist anymore, Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, that can make Stilton. So the Hartington Creamery, with our tourist office, we couldn't have Stilton cheese. Or Bakewell pudding or tart. Personally, I prefer Buxton pudding, but that's a personal choice. So Bakewell, the Bakewell shop, the Bakewell pudding will be banned. Hard pasture, and it's a response to all this stuff about grain. You will notice that we have place names like Tor. Mantor means mother hill, or moor, Danesmoor, Grassmoor, because our geology is hills, and that's why we have a predominantly pasture-based farmers. Some of them have a hard time. Hard pasture, mainly lamb, but you'll also see deer, you'll see some beef. Quite rare to get the beef, but you'll see the Highland cattle as you go through the Peak District Park. They eat grass, they don't have any antibiotics, they don't have any hormones, and they eat on land that you cannot have agriculture in terms of growing plants. So I think this motion doesn't understand the history. Derbyshire means deer hunting ground in Anglo-Saxon. It doesn't understand the geography or the economy. I've got farms in Dromfield. I've got organic farms, geese, beef, sheep, and it doesn't understand the culture. We still have people here who obtain their own protein, rabbits, trout, fishing, and I think we should respect that right. That's part of Derbyshire. It's part of our history and culture. But I respect other people who want to be vegan, and I completely respect that. Thank you.
Councillor Windley.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm not comfortable with this at all. The first one, I'm not too sure if it means that only plant-based foods should be provided at council meetings, which I don't agree with that. And it's a bit like the others. I'll cut it short because others have said very similar to what I was going to say. It's a bit dictating, and there are some people we need to remember that do have certain health conditions that can't eat a lot of plant-based foods, unfortunately, even though they would prefer that way. So we just need to be mindful that it's a bit dictating this. So, yeah, to promote it, you know, leaflets and things on walls, but not to push it down people's throats. I'm sorry.
Not literally, anyway.
No.
Councillor Reid.
Yeah. Do I have to press something? It's red. Okay, it's there. No, it's good. Look, I will agree with Frank on this. I think that we should be, where possible, under our responsibility, promoting a healthy lifestyle to people and giving them choice. Where I have a challenge is where I'll start with point 3, where we're promoting plant-based and reducing advertising for other things. What part of this goes into the health provision? The NHS provides the guidelines for what a good diet is, and I don't know if that's the responsibility of district council or local council, or where it is. I'm happy to support that, but not at the expense of something else. And I don't think that council is a health providing body. I think that that should be left to the medical professionals. Do I think we should have choice in our leisure centres and things like that? Sure, but that is a personal preference. Again, the economic concerns that have been raised are great, and we've just gone through talking about the budget and raising certain things. What I'm really concerned about there is the impact on local businesses. I believe a motion similar to this passed down Brighton Way through the council, and it got quickly overturned by the unions, and so they had to reverse the decision. I'm all for it going to scrutiny committee and being looked at, but I think there are some very serious implications that on face value this doesn't address. And I don't think that in this form, without very significant change, I could support it. And like others have echoed, we live in a democracy and it has to be personal choice. I'm all for putting something out to educate people and letting them choose, but we can't, as a council, local or district or otherwise, dictate to people how they should live their lives. And I don't think that's the spirit with which this is intended, and I understand it's all about trying to promote and to safeguard our planet for people in future generations. However, I want to be very careful to get the balance right, that we're not overstepping what our authority is as representatives and telling people how they should live.
Thank you. Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to pick up on that. The authoritarianism in this is horrendous. I fully support the motion if it is about promoting and adding extra choice. I think that's a wonderful thing to do. If you can encourage people to change what they eat because they choose to do so, that's fine. But to actually say, no, you can't have this, you can't have that, that to me is not an acceptable position for us to take. So I can't support it, I'm afraid.
Councillor Gillett.
The amendment to the motion, I think, changes the motion slightly from asking council to do this, but by referring it to scrutiny, it's asking council to consider it. And as Councillor Barker said, there are lots of complexities to this, many of which have come out today. And like other people have said, if this was pushed to a vote today without that amendment, I think I would have voted against it. But I have no difficulty whatsoever in a proper debate taking place at a scrutiny committee meeting. It may be that we decide not to do this in full, but it could be as a result of this, there are things that we do decide to do, and I think they should be properly examined with recommendations coming back to Cabinet. So on that basis, Chair, I'm happy to support it, since it is simply going to scrutiny committee for a proper investigation and hopefully some constructive recommendations coming out of it. But I suspect it won't be 100% with what this particular motion was originally asking for.
Thank you. Councillor Shipman.
Thank you, Chair. Before the Labour amendment, I was actually going to amend it myself, particularly removing point 1, because I believe in choice. I would have changed the word prioritising to promote and add in after plant-based and other vegan, vegetarian acceptable options, because like I don't know, one of the councillor mentioned it about the in terms of what people can eat and the health reasons for eating certain foods. I think if you're just shoving it down people's throats that you've got to be plant-based, you're not going to get the buy-in from residents. You've got to kind of lead a horse to water and you know, gradually get to a point. You can't just expect everyone to wake up tomorrow and everyone be vegan, because that's just you know, pie in the sky stuff. You're not going to convince people that way. So I don't know if it's worth me amending it so that scrutiny are considering a different proposal, because the current proposal, I would certainly not be happy with scrutiny considering it as it's written now. So what's the motion looking at now before I decide whether to amend it or not?
Well, the amendment is about this all going to a scrutiny to be considered, but I'll just let Councillor Barker clarify that.
Yeah, just to clarify, in my head, I'm just looking at the motion, and it commits to, and then it's to consider the following issues as they're written, the 1, 2, 3. Consider those 3 issues through an environment scrutiny committee. Does that make sense? So,
Yes.
so it's as written, but instead of committing the council to it, all we're committing to is that it goes to the, but to leave those in as written and consider the pros and cons of them issues, yeah?
So that it's taking out a very key bit there about commits to. So it's all of these matters will then be taken to a scrutiny committee for consideration. So all of these things outlined in here will form part of a discussion at scrutiny.
Yeah.
Does that help you?
Kind of, but
just make it clear.
No, I haven't given you notification to speak yet. Just wait 1 moment.
Like I say, personally, I wouldn't like to see the scrutiny debating with point 1. And the last bit of point 3, where it says and removal of meat and dairy advertising, and where it says prioritising, I would change that to promote, and then after plant-based, I would say and other vegetarian acceptable options, because I don't want the committee to be doing something that I completely
the
disagree
committee
with.
isn't committing to anything; it's a discussion. But I'm going to let Councillor Addington Stringer answer that point.
Okay.
Yes.
I accept the amendment as a friendly amendment, and therefore I'm assuming we don't need to have a vote on the amendment.
No.
So the proposal is there as it is, but we will have that discussion in scrutiny. It's not going to be before. This isn't my right to reply, but authoritarian Frank isn't going to dominate it. There will be a selection of councillors in the room, and we will have a conversation. Just remind you, I'm the only Green.
You might try and silence them though.
It'll be a debate at scrutiny. That's what it's not committing to anything today. It's for scrutiny. That's where it'll end up. Any other comments? If not, I'm going to come back to Councillor Weatherall for her right of reply as a seconder.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Very happy with the amendment. I think it moves things forward. Whatever comes out of that, I think the discussions will be useful. Just the point around Ashover farmers, just talking to Ashover farmers, they are getting rid of their herds of cattle because they cannot afford to keep them going. The small family farms in Ashover are diversifying enormously, doing all sorts of things, including holiday homes and all sorts of things, because they cannot afford the cattle feed. Dairy herds are being not destroyed but are being dismantled, so I think this is a direction of travel, and I think it's about demonstrating leadership at a time when climate change is absolutely hitting us around the head daily. So I wanted to thank Councillor Adlington Stringer for bringing this forward. I'm worried about climate change and the implications for us all, particularly for my grandchildren. Last year, as Frank said, hottest year on record. This year, maybe even hotter. Hot air means more extreme weather events, more absorption of water, more rain, more flooding. The economic and human costs of that, enormous. And I think our response has to be twofold. First of all, big commitments like reducing oil and gas extraction, but then in addition to that, a myriad of small changes. Councillor Dale, I admire you for doing that, and I want to know how you're getting on, because I need to do that. I need to ask Councillor Barker whether he still uses dripping in his chip pan.
I've got.
I knew you did. I guess that was the case. But myriad of small changes at personal, family and organisation level. And I think this motion supports that approach. This demonstration of our commitment and maybe not enforcing it, but actually encouraging it, strongly encouraging it, so that we are on that direction of travel. So I'm happy with the amendment. I'm happy with the discussion we've had, and want to thank the council for listening. Thank you.
Councillor Adlington Stringy, your final response?
Well, of course it's going through without a vote. Dictator. I just want to pick up on a couple of points there. There was a lot of conversation about pro-choice. Yes, people can eat whatever they want to eat at home. This is about us as a leadership organisation. That's our role, and I have to remind you of that. It's quite scary. We are leading our communities. We are showing the way. We are treading the path so they can follow, and they can make similar choices if they choose to at home. And personal preference aside, they make their choices, and my personal preference is that I have a future, that my children have a future, my grandchildren have a future. And if that means eating a few less burgers along the way, then I'm happy to do that. And that's for other people to make their choice as well. But we as a council should lead the way based on science, based on facts in front of us. We don't have food at council meetings, so we go hungry anyway. Just to address Councillor Windley's point. The Bakewell Tart Shop, I've actually bought a vegan Bakewell tart from there before. So we're about progress, about changing, about making options, providing for people, leading the way. The Bakewell Tart Shop, they're ahead of the game, mate. The same goes for Stilton, and the same goes for a range of other things. We're finding alternatives, we're finding ways, we're adapting to the climate which has been so long forgotten about and which has been put behind profit for all too long. We want to support farmers. And Councillor Dale, I come back to your point, as I so often have to. You're happy to let consumers bring down the meat and dairy industry. You're happy for them to make choices at home. But you're not happy for us to be ahead of the game, to put the steps in place, to try and create a smooth transition to the way the world's going, to create a sustainable future. That is putting farmers at risk. That is leaving people in Ashover, people across our district, in a rural part of the world, in economic uncertainty, and we should be taking a lead on that. So I feel that's an absolute failure of this council. And to just the rhetoric, just want to finish. Some of the discourse used in this room has been absolutely appalling. I'm someone concerned about climate, someone who wants to see our council taking steps in the right direction. And for you to sit here and call me authoritarian, dictatorial, and to suggest that this is some kind of power play is ridiculous. This is a democracy, and we come in here to debate things sensibly. And as far as I can see, you all agree with doing it. Councillor Dale wants to do it 1 day a week. People want to make these changes. Let's take a bold step and lead the way, and stop hiding behind reviews. Thank you very much.
So just to be clear then, the friendly amendment was agreed, which was that we're taking out the word about commits to, but we are asking that these matters are considered at a scrutiny committee. So let's move to the vote. Right. You're not off for a sausage roll, are you?
Just gone for that bacon tart.
Right, I think we've had enough time to vote, so let's go to the results. That's it, the motion is carried. Thank Thank you. So item 12, there's no urgent business from myself, so we move to item 13. I move that the public be excluded from the meeting during the discussion of the following items of business to avoid the disclosure to them of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, Part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972, as amended by the Local Government Access to Information Variation Order 2006. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you, that's carried. So we're going to move into exclusion of public. So we need to switch off the live streaming. Is it right? Thank you. I can confirm that live streaming has ended. So we move to item 14, the Derby and Derbyshire Strategic Leadership Board. Over to you, Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that trip's over at tongue, isn't it? Derbyshire Strategic Leadership Board. Brilliant. And I'm sure you've all read it, this report. It's got all the information you need. But to cut a long story short, I think this board is designed to replace 3 other committees that have been in existence for quite a while. And I know Lee, when I got to be leader,